It says we're live. We are live. Does that sound? It's got good.
I think we're live.
Pretty good. Okay, we are live. Sponsored by the White Monster. That is Latter-day Chad that is drinking the White Monster. We are joined by Latter-day Avenger as well. Listen, we're talking about some really interesting things. I don't know how many people are even on here. Maybe there's 1, maybe there's 10, maybe there's 20. I don't know. But there's some things happening. And the return of Jesus Cristo is fast approaching. In fact, I saw somewhere where Donald Trump is telling commanders that, hey, we're doing this war. Well, should we watch the clip or should we wait?
We'll summarize some of the stuff.
Okay, so, check this out. Watch this guy.
Defense commanders been telling U.S. forces that the war in Iran is about Armageddon and the coming of Jesus? Holy hell, it looks like they have. This is one of those stories that I saw in my doom scroll and thought, no way is this real. Before we go on, ask yourself how many whistleblower reports it would take for you to believe this story. 1? A dozen? What if I told you it was more than 200? The Military Religious Freedom Foundation has received whistleblower reports from service members spread across 40 different units positioned at least 30 military installations around the Middle East. One non-coms report said that their commander, quote, urged us to tell our troops that this was all part of God's divine plan, and he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. That same commander reportedly told troops that President Trump was, quote, anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. The complaints are anonymous.
So what they're saying is Donald Trump has been anointed by Jesus to usher in the second coming.
Apparently. Do you think, are we talking about like
200 people have said this stuff.
I mean, here's another crazy thing we're getting at. So I've mentioned this to a lot of people. I mentioned on the video when I was talking about the CIA documents. We have the CIA talking about how astral projection is real. And for that guy in the comments who was saying I was a part of the occult for mentioning astral projection, I wasn't telling people to do it. I was simply saying our government says that it's real. Now we have Donald Trump telling people, I've been anointed by Jesus Christ to bring about Armageddon. We have all this weird stuff. So to atheists, I always say, even if you don't believe this stuff is real, the people who control everything certainly do.
Yeah, so which is interesting. And I'm back. I'm here with my adopted son, Latter-day Chad. He came over. I had no idea he had scheduled a live stream for today. So I'm just down here working on some stuff, reading some scriptures, and he comes walking in and he's like, yeah, I got a live stream in about 5 minutes. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I guess we're doing a little live stream. But it is cool that that's being reported and that the government is aware that Jesus is coming back really soon and that this war in Iran is to, I guess, fulfill prophecy. What prophecy are they talking? Are they talking like Armageddon, like
that's what they're claiming
type stuff, or what?
And here's another thing you got to ask. So I want to give both sides perspective here of this idea, right? Because there are people like, wow, Donald Trump's been anointed by Jesus himself to bring Armageddon. But there's also this idea that after the war in Iran was started, the Department of Justice deleted about, I think it was like 6,000 files from the Epstein files that were released on their website while nobody was noticing. And there's this idea that, are they just starting a massive war to cover up the corruption? I don't know. Or is somehow the Epstein files being used to blackmail the United States by some foreign country? I don't want to mention any names, but there could be a foreign country out there.
Like the North Country? Like a very foreign country?
It could be the North Country, but I don't think they're using blackmail. It could be, I'm sure there's some country that is real out there that could be blackmailing us. I don't know what country it could be, but I'll let your guys' intuition use that one. Potentially.
Did you say is real?
Yeah, it is. It has to be a country that is real. It couldn't be a fake country.
Okay.
I think I'm right on the nose on that one, right?
Yeah.
But you never know. So could it be the prophets from the North Country? Could the North Country be instructing Donald Trump?
That's what I think. I think the North Country is actively engaged. They're instructing Donald Trump on exactly what to do. And those are the ones in DNC 101 that have been commanded to tarry.
Well, here's something interesting as well before we get more into this. I'm going to do I shouldn't say I'm gonna,
a good idea would
consequences when you lie. There are karmic consequences when you lie. But
no, what he's saying here, we're going to teach this real quick. And because he would tell me, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm like, if you're not actually planning on doing that, don't say it. Don't say it because the law of karma says when you say you're going to do something and then you don't do it, you have consequences for that. So you can say, hey, it'd be a good idea if, and so we're going to use a good idea, right? So
Yeah, it would be a good idea that
you
I would
gotta speak
like.
closer to the microphone.
So I would like to do a
slide this over.
slide. I would like to do a video. So there, I'm gonna see if I can pull this up later in the live stream. But I would like to do a whole video breaking this down. That it was when I think it was, I don't know if this was recent or if it was when Edward Snowden leaked things from the intelligence. But there was an article that came out from the official Iranian military saying that the United States is being controlled by tall, blonde, white aliens. So you have to ask yourself, are those the prophets from the North Country? Could those be the fallen angels, the watchers? What could it be? Because we have this sort of Michael Rush idea that both those in the North Country and those who are fallen angels have access to technology like UFOs, right? We also have reports where Donald Trump is coming out and saying that he's going to release stuff about alien disclosures, but it's going to affect people in a religious way, he says. So,
well, and it's clear that we're using technology. I mean, I've seen some of the bombs going off there, and those don't look like just traditional missiles. So, DNC 133 talks actually about the people from the North Country providing resources to Ephraim to help defend themselves. And so, anyways, it's an interesting time that it's being reported that commanders are being told that this is all in conjunction with the second coming. So, you got to ask yourself the question, what does Donald Trump know about what's going on? And is there more going on than he's leading on to? Or, why would they be reporting this from over 200 people?
yeah, and I'll say this, like, if the stuff about Donald Trump in the Epstein files is true, one of two things is going on. Either A, he is an antichrist type figure who's trying to deceive us, or B, maybe he made some sort of deal with John and the prophets from the North Country where he did some bad things in the past. And we're like, okay, we're going to let you off the hook, but you have to do what we say, and you have to be in this position. And maybe he is in an uncomfortable position with certain foreign countries, but because he has to be in there to fulfill prophecy. But we are joined by Latter-day Avenger, and we've talked a lot, so I'd like to give him a chance to introduce himself and share some of his thoughts on this. So without further ado, let me switch this over.
Welcome to the show, Latter-day Avenger.
Thank you. So I'm in the military, and so when I first read that headline, I didn't think it was true. But I was actually able to independently verify that it was true, because I'm in this, so on Reddit, I heard these soldiers that were talking about it, and they said that they had heard it. And when I did a deep dive in their profiles, like, their unit designations matched the unit that was being reported. And I was like, there's no way that this report was just that elaborate. Like, it obviously happened, I don't know if they're expecting the second coming, or if it's just like they're trying to usher it in. I know that Pete Hegseth kind of has this drive for a crusade that you can't deny at all. I remember when he first got sworn in as the Secretary of Defense, they're making a big deal about his tattoos. He doesn't have.
I saw him give somebody the old PG grip the other day. That's floating around on the internet too.
Yeah, he doesn't have just one Crusader tattoo. He has like 3. He has a Deus Vult on his arm. His whole left pectoral muscle is the Jerusalem cross. And he actually wrote a book. Do you guys know what it was titled?
What was it called?
American Crusade. You can look it up.
So, interesting.
Obviously, this man has a drive for a crusade, and I'm like, at what point do we call this a war? At what point do we call this a crusade? Because
And what's this guy's name? I'd like to pull up a picture of him.
Pete Hegseth.
Pete
You know
Hegseth,
Pete Hegseth.
Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense.
I don't pay attention to any of these guys. I'm just like,
And you know what's interesting. Speaking of crusades, my ancestors date back to King Baldwin, who was one of the crusaders, King Baldwin of Jerusalem. And so, oh, you pulled that up. Nice. Yeah, that's Pete Hegseth. Right
Yeah,
there.
so he's second in command of the U.S. military.
Pete Hegseth tattoos. Let's see these. You know, not many people know this, but I actually have a tattoo on my shoulder, but it's secret, so I can't
There it
share
is.
it. Okay,
So on
so
the right,
we've got
That is total crusader right there, dude. That is
Yeah,
on his
so
chest.
this man is second in command to the president over the entire U.S. military. And then
Oh yeah,
Wow.
he's a crusader.
yeah, he's a crusader.
So, do you think that we are heading towards a modern holy war, actually? And what sort of role do you think that the LDS Church, based on prophecy, based on our culture, based on what's going on with us, what role do you think it's going to play?
I mean, it's definitely prophecy in that all nations assembled against Israel, right? And you're just kind of seeing whether, like, I'm not preaching for or against Israel, right? But you are seeing a big movement that's just, I feel like everyone I know is just, it's the talk of the town, right? Israel this, Israel that. At one point, it was just kind of like something like a conspiracy theory that you could somewhat brush off. But now, at the point that they've dragged us into a war that's being called a holy war, I think it has escalated the seriousness of the situation. In terms of thinking that it's hard to say if it's like I said, it's hard to say if this is something they're trying to usher in, or if they know something is coming.
Well, and could you say that technically America is Israel? Because so we got to ask the question when it says everybody will be gathered against Israel. Is America considered Israel since we're so aligned with Israel?
I personally don't think so, because when you read, a lot of the old sermons from the 1800s, like by Orson Pratt particularly, he specifies Jerusalem, right? And it's not like the United States is in control of Jerusalem. I think it's more likely that um, it's referring to, because Israel, there's almost two Israels, right? There's the nation state, and then there's us, right? Until with
And then there's the people who call themselves Jews but are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. So you got that whole class of people too.
I hear they're calling them the Epstein class now because they don't want to be called anti-Semitic. But it's interesting because a lot of those type of people, like DNA wise, I think they're like Polish or something, right? Like they're not. It's not even Semitic people, but there is like this class of atheistic sort of people who certainly claim that they are Jews.
Well, in that, I mean, that's the case for Netanyahu, right?
Yeah, so there's three types of Jews. There's Sephardic, Mizrahi, and Ashkenazi. So those are the main three. Sephardic, they were kicked out of Spain and they kind of settled North Africa. And then there's the Mizrahi, who they're ethnically closer to like Arabs. And then there's Ashkenazi that are like Eastern European, right? And so I don't know. One idea that I've kind of been floating with them, like, is that Revelation 2:9? Is that just referring to Ashkenazi? It's hard to put Jews into one category, if you get what I'm saying.
Like maybe not even like the Ashkenazi Jews in general, but like this upper class of, like, we see this talk of this in the Epstein files, talking about that stuff, this higher class that are completely disassociated from the lower class people, because it's not like the random people who live in Israel who are Ashkenazi Jews who are even necessarily aware of this bizarre stuff that's going on. But it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So I do want to give a shout out to Intentional Disciple. And listen, I too would love to do this podcast and have Michael Rush on and talk spaceships and the ships from Tarshish and the North Country stuff. And so, anyways,
Actually, imagine how many views, like we're talking about videos doing well, a video that's with Michael Rush talking about is Iran saying that the United States is controlled by tall, blonde, white aliens, and he's on the that would go viral. People would flock to that.
yeah, totally. Well, that's an interesting concept. Didn't Hitler claim to be taken somewhere and people were like these tall, blonde, blue-eyed people?
Yeah, and he describes this place, and they call it Agartha or Hyperbia, and he describes it as being in the earth. And then we have Joseph Smith saying, well, John the Revelator is in the North Country. Apparently we have an echo. Is it us that has the echo? Leave in the chat. What's going? Because with Stanley Heaton, we've had this stuff, and the electronics have been being screwed up lately.
Yeah, you might have to just get closer to the mic.
Okay. Do I sound better now? Is there an echo? So this place that Hitler is talking about, and we could totally do a video about this with the Iran tall, blonde, white aliens thing. Hitler did claim that there was this place hidden in the earth that they call Agartha, which featured these tall, blonde, white aliens, essentially, who had spaceships. And if you look at what the Nazis were actually believing, like they were searching for this place. They were deep into bizarre spiritual things that some would call the occult. And there appears to be some sort of spiritual crusade that they believed they were on. And you have to ask yourself, were these tall, blonde, white aliens, which are apparently in the center of the earth, are they translated beings from the North Country? Right? Because we hear so many people reporting this stuff of these tall, blonde, white men in spaceships, but they look like humans, right? So it's not like a gray alien or a reptilian or whatever they believe. It's like it's human people. And then we also talk about Ezekiel's wheel in the Old Testament, where Ezekiel describes the angels riding around on these wheels with all these eyes and lights around them. And it sounds like a UFO, right? So sometimes I wonder if a lot of this spiritual stuff is going to turn out to be a lot more sci-fi than we're expecting. Oh,
we lost our...
I think maybe his camera just turned off. I don't know, we'll continue until we...
Okay, I'll swap you over here. Okay.
Right.
So for those of you who have just joined us, we've been talking about Donald Trump and the reports that have been coming in that the commanders are being told that the reason why this war is happening is because the second coming is nigh at hand, and this is part of the ushering in of the second coming. And so that's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast today. It's Avengers who has the echo. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Well, here's something else that they have been reporting on. There have been reports in North Korea's news. There's been reports from Iran's news that Netanyahu has been assassinated.
Now, I've heard that. My wife's been telling me that that's the case. I haven't verified that. And again, this podcast today, this is a live stream talking about current events, talking about a lot of things going on. But people are saying that it was AI doing the speaking for him because he has 6 fingers.
Yeah, so I've got an image of this. I'll send it to you. You get ready to pull that up on there and just...
You can pull it up on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so whether Netanyahu is dead or not, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm going to get this. You can entertain them for a little bit while I'm pulling this up.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much flying around right now, and I think one of the challenges that we are going to have as a people is just knowing what's true and what's not true. It is going to be a challenge because we're going to be tricked by AI, and we're going to see something that might actually be true, like a spaceship flying in from the North Country, and people are going to be like, "Oh, that's AI. That's definitely AI." And so, okay, we're going to pull this up here.
So we're going to remove this one off the screen.
Yep.
And then add to stage. So if we zoom in on, is there a way to zoom in on this?
No, there's not.
Well, if you look closely, so right after this report that there was a missile strike that killed Benjamin Netanyahu, this video comes out of him apparently talking to instruct them, except he has 6 fingers in it, right? So in the video released, which is supposedly proving that Netanyahu is in fact alive, he has 6 fingers. And then they released another one today where he's in this coffee shop and he's like, "I'm not dead, but I'm dying for coffee. We can get this." And he doesn't have 6 fingers. He doesn't have his usual 6 fingers. He has 5 fingers, but his fingers are very fat. Like they do not match his body whatsoever. He's got these big chunky fingers. And so and his face, like I remember like seeing like the side view of his face. His face looked very squished, right? So for whatever reason, they are putting out these AI videos of Benjamin Netanyahu. So either he is in hiding or he is dead. But here's a plot twist for you. All right, you guys ready for this? You ready for the plot twist?
Don't listen to this plot twist.
It's a good plot twist. All right. So imagine this: Netanyahu, he's not dead, he's alive, but he was bombed. He was, and there's one where his teeth are coming out and go. I know, like his teeth were moving around in his mouth in the video of him. So there's no way this is real. But imagine this: Benjamin Netanyahu. There's a bomb that goes down, and then he's just completely disfigured. He's marred, one might say. Marred more than any man. And I saw the visage of a man that was marred more than any other. And then it turns out Netanyahu is the Davidic servant, right? He's here to usher in the second coming of Jesus Christ. And he's the marred servant. And then Jesus shows up and heals him.
Yeah, now we've just lost all of our subscriber base with that plot twist. Somebody's going to clip that and say, see, they think Netanyahu is. But regardless, there's so many things going on. And with AI, it gets really tricky to try and figure out, well, what is true and what's actually going on, you know? And so that's one of the challenges that we face. And I think that's why the prophet said, you know, you're going to have the Holy Ghost constantly to know what's going on. So anyways, let's see if Latter-day Avenger's got his mic fixed. Make sure there's no echo. He's back on here. I don't know. What do you think about all the stuff that's swirling around about Netanyahu?
I mean, I personally, I guess just to be devil's advocate here, like there actually is a tactical reason why someone would not want to release footage of them, because when you release a video, right? Can you hear me? Okay, so when you release a video, and if they can somehow get, you know, the original like print of the file, they can actually data mine a video, and they can get something called like a geotag from the video. Like they can actually get your location from a picture or a video. It's actually been a problem in the Ukraine war where soldiers are posting Snapchats and Instagram Reels. They're able to get the file of the video and then find out where they are. The reason why he doesn't want to release videos of himself is also because he doesn't want them to be able to pin his location and hit him, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense to me. The other thing that's happening with this war is, and the other thing that we're finding is it's challenging because you get these videos where they're like, I'm in Tel Aviv and it's perfectly fine here and there's nothing going on here and it's totally safe and there's no war. And then you get these other ones where it's like there's bombs going off, there's missiles going off, and there's all sorts of stuff, and you don't know what's actually going on. And this is the first time that we've had a real war like this where social media is like it is, and you can watch the war or what you think is the war from your device. And that's a whole different twist of things.
Yeah.
LDC, you got anything on that?
Well, what you're saying, have you ever seen the show Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Actually, okay, because you're always making fun of those shows. So there's an interesting thing that reminds me of that show where there's this whole underground brainwashing thing going on in this city called Ba Sing Se. And they find out, like, because they're trying to keep the people in the city of Ba Sing Se from knowing that there's this world war going on between the Fire Nation and all this. And so this guy, his name's Jet, he's trying to expose this stuff. And then he gets taken into the underground brainwashing facility, and they're like hypnotizing him. And they're like, there is no war in Ba Sing Se. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. And then he just comes out, and they meet this guy again, and he's just completely MK Ultra'd. And it's really unclear if he dies or not. In fact, on the episode where they do a play that's recreating everything that happened in the show, he just falls underneath a rock, and they're like, did he just die? And they're like, it was really unclear. And maybe that's what happened to Benjamin Netanyahu. Maybe it's just really unclear what happened to him, like Jet from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, and Vida Brava says, yeah, we've seen war footage that was actually taken from video games. I mean, so it's becoming so challenging to know what is real, what is truth. One of the goals of Zion Media has been to help people sharpen their discernment. And we have told people on Zion Media on countless occasions, hey, we're interviewing guests, we're presenting different things, you need to go and confirm this with the Holy Ghost. Like, so you should go and do that. And we're really having to do that now. And I think it's only, number one, AI is only getting better, not worse. So we've got to be able to determine that. And I agree, Latter-day Avenger. If I was Benjamin Netanyahu, I wouldn't want people knowing where I was at. And so you got to be strategic, especially in times like these, because, while we took out, Israel, America took out their supreme leader, they're going to do everything they can to, whether that's take out Trump or take out Benjamin Netanyahu. That would be a huge win for them.
Well, another thing we're seeing get reported is this idea that there's going to be a false flag attack against the United States to push us more into the war, because we have had a lot of pushback from both Republicans and Democrats. We have people that are super far right-wing, super far leftist progressive, who are both saying, no, we don't want to go fight and die in a war for Israel, right? And then we hear reports where the military is like, well, we've mysteriously had 4 drones disappear and we don't know where they went. And we've also had stuff where they're like, there might be an attack from Iran on California, just so you guys know. And everyone's like, are they preparing us for a false flag operation where they're going to push us into the war by attacking our own people? And that's what a lot of people suspect 9/11 was, right? Where we see the tower on 9/11 that was not hit by any of the towers, like the third tower that just collapsed on its own.
Wait, you're telling me 9/11 was a setup?
Apparently.
My goodness. I'm just kidding, Latter-day Avenger. He's like, he doesn't know this?
And it's also interesting as well because Trump really ran on this base that, like, the Iraq war with 9/11, it was a mistake. He's like, they said there were weapons of mass destruction and they weren't. He was getting on Jeb Bush for this in the debates. And now we have Netanyahu, who's been saying for 20 years that Iran, they're a week away from having nukes. They've been a week away from having nukes for about 20 or 30 years now. But he's going down that route. So you have to ask yourself, why has he switched? Was he always thinking that? Is there some sort of bigger plan going on? Or did he betray his base? Or was he pressured? You have to ask what's going on here, because there's clearly stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, especially when the military is literally saying, Trump has been anointed by Jesus Christ to bring Armageddon. And for those who are just joining us, because we had about 10, 20 viewers before when we played that video, I think, let's play this video again. So there are reports. Now that was not it. But for those of you just joining us, there are reports coming.
Commanders been telling U.S. forces that the war in Iran is about Armageddon and the coming of Jesus. Holy hell, it looks like they have. This is one of those stories that I saw on my doom scroll and thought, no way is this real. Before we go on, ask yourself how many whistleblower reports it would take for you to believe this story. 1? A dozen? What if I told you it was more than 200? The Military Religious Freedom Foundation has received whistleblower reports from service members spread across 40 different units positioned at least 30 military installations around the Middle East. One non-coms report said that their commander, quote, urged us to tell our troops that this was all part of God's divine plan, and he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. That same commander reportedly told troops that President Trump was, quote, anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. The complaints are anonymous.
Okay, I mean, you got 200 people reporting this from 30 different installations. And Latter-day Avenger, maybe you can just talk a little bit. You're in the military. You've checked up on this. What have you found?
Well, like I said earlier, so I'm in these Reddit groups, and in these Reddit forums, like, people are verified as soldiers, right? So that, not some rando creates an account and they're like, I'm a Green Beret, right? I'm able to see these people, they're telling me what happened and what they heard, and then I'll go to I'll do a deep dive into their profile. I see the same unit designations as what's being reported by the watchdog, And I'm like, there's no way, like it's too elaborate for them to fake that. Like, I honestly believe that was said. Obviously, context is everything. It's like, were they joking? Was it kind of like an off the mic thing? But I mean, it was big enough for a lot of people to hear it, right? And like I said, it kind of ties back in the whole crusader just rhetoric, because the Arabs, like, even during the Iraq and Iran, or the Iraq and Afghanistan war, it's like they saw it very much as a continuation of the crusade. The word that they actually used to describe an American soldier in Arabic, I can't remember the exact word, but it was the same word they used for a crusader. You know, essentially, like, it essentially kind of is a holy war. Um, and as we talked about earlier, it's like Hexeth tattoos. They don't deny it. Big old Jerusalem cross on his chest, Dale's Volt on his arm. He wrote a book called American Crusade. It's like, at what point do we call it a crusade? That was just my thoughts, though.
Yeah, listen, and I'm a big fan of the Crusaders, and I think I mentioned this. My ancestry goes back to King Baldwin the First, the Second, and the Third, who were the kings of Jerusalem that were part of the Crusaders that took over Jerusalem. So I like the idea of the Crusaders. I think it's cool if we have them today. Like, I'm rooting for them. Hi, Grace. Grace says, please say hi to me. Hello, Grace. H7P5S. Happy you've joined us here. Okay, I'm going to take off. I'm going to let you guys take it from here. But hey, keep tuning into Zion Media. We've broken through, and we're starting to see our subscriber base, maybe because we called them out because we were being throttled. I don't know what was happening. But we've broken through. We're trying to get 20,000 subscribers. If you're watching this right now, you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Let us earn your subscription. We've done 1,000 videos in 2 years, for heaven's sakes. So we got some really cool videos coming out this week. I just recorded a video on what is Zion. So stay tuned. We got a bunch of cool stuff coming out. We've got a great video coming out with Latter-day Chad and Stanley Heaton on the woman of Zion and Isaiah 54 and the barren woman. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, so video we have coming out is about the prophecy of the wife of the end times servant. And I'm also going to make a follow-up on that video questioning, is the reason that Dallin H. Oaks and President Nelson, that they married a barren woman after their first wife died because they understand the prophecy in Isaiah about the wife of the servant or the servants.
They thought they might be the servant.
Right, because Isaiah 62 or 63, I believe, also suggests that it might be some sort of dual prophecy. We don't really know, and me and Stanley kind of go into that a little bit. But it's interesting when you see that pattern where it's like both Dallin H. Oaks and Russell M. Nelson married a barren woman, and the prophecy in Isaiah in the book of Lamentations is that the end time servant's wife will be barren and without child. So very fascinating stuff. But to go further ado, one thing that I would like to touch on a little bit, so I'm sure you've noticed this, but there is a cultural shift happening among Latter-day Saints, especially among younger people. I'm sure you've seen it on Instagram. I'd even say that your Instagram page is a part of this sort of movement. What would you describe this sort of shift as being? Because people are noticing it. There is a change. What would you say on that?
It's definitely, I've kind of noticed it generational, right? What people that I mean, this is anecdotal evidence, but what I've kind of noticed is the people that are what we call boomers, for some reason, they don't want to let go that Israel is the Holy Land, that they're God's chosen people. But, as like the younger generation has, more access to what's going on the ground through smartphones, they're seeing all this. They basically just wiped Gaza completely out, turned it into a parking lot. There's all this debate about how many Palestinian kids have died, but we know it's a lot. And then you're seeing the Epstein file release, right? And then at first you're kind of like, oh, if these people control the world, that sounds kind of outlandish. And then you read these emails and you're like, wait, why are they talking? Why is Jeffrey Epstein's bank account the same name as a Hebrew demonic pagan god, And they're talking about controlling the goyim. It's like, I was like, what is goyim? It means cattle. And the idea of what they were talking about was how like the non-Judas serve us, and they're talking about that in emails, and I'm like, I feel like I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I'm like, it's kind of giving them more credibility in a sense. So I'd just say with a combination of the Epstein files, the atrocities of Netanyahu, there's a big shift in what's been, going on.
That's interesting. So do you... Sorry, go ahead. So do you think that there is some sort of connection to this? Why do you think it is that the younger generation is more aware of things like secret combinations? Could it be that the older generation are the ones who say all is well in Zion? And I don't know, here's another question to follow up on that. Are you familiar with the parable in D&C 101 of the redemption of Zion?
If you brush up on it, I'm sure I could recall it.
So the parable in D&C 101, it describes the Lord's vineyard, and to summarize D&C 101, and it's touched again in D&C 103 when the Lord breaks down the parable and gives some of its meaning. Essentially, there are the servants on the watchtower, and when they get close to the money changers, they fall asleep on the towers, and the enemy actually builds his watchtower inside the Lord's vineyard. And so the Lord calls one of his servants, and the strength of his house and the young men, they rise up and they essentially kick out the secret combinations, right? And they take back the Lord's vineyard. So do you think that this awareness of secret, like, could the boomers who are just completely just out of it, think all is well in Zion, could they be those men who fell asleep on the watchtowers? And could this younger generation who's rising up being the young men and the strength of the house who redeem Zion in that parable?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it could also be something more down the line, as Covenant, and he said it was his belief that, elders of Israel would save the Constitution hanging by a thread. Obviously that's going to come from younger people, right? Especially as...
That makes a lot of sense.
So it could be. I can't confirm or deny that, but...
Yeah, and it's just interesting that we see this stuff because these parables, they're things that haven't happened yet. And a lot of people, when they're looking at the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, they always assume that all of the prophecies have happened. And they almost have like a very Catholic or Protestant type view where Catholics and Protestants are like, all the prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus Christ, and now we don't need any more revelation. Nothing else is going to happen. We just have to wait till Jesus comes. And I've noticed a lot of the people in the LDS Church have sort of fallen into that same mindset where they think that one day Dallin H. Oaks is just going to announce at General Conference, well, guys, I'd like you to meet Jesus Christ. The second coming is here. And then Jesus comes out and gives a conference talk on something or other. I feel like maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that a lot of people don't seem to understand that there are very many events that have to happen. In fact, I think it was John Taylor who famously said, until we build Zion, Christ will not come, right? So it could be that this war, I know you posted a meme about this, that somebody who I sold solar with out in Florida and Ohio actually messaged me asking, is that Latter-day Avenger account another one of yours? About that meme where...
Which one was it?
It's the one where you show World War II and it has these people from World War II like Stalin and Churchill and Hitler maybe, I don't remember who. And it's like the World War II built the nation state of Israel. And then you have another one where it's like Trump, Epstein, and Netanyahu photoshopped on those three guys. And it's like World War III will bring in the nation state of Israel. And then it shows Zion on the American continent. But could there be truth to that where, like, let's say hypothetically, these tall, blonde, white aliens that the Iranian government, I can pull up the article, says control the United States, they could be the prophets from the North Country. They could be the Agartha, Hyperborea people that Hitler talked about. And it could be that they are instructing Donald Trump saying, you have to go to this war and you have to cause this to happen so that Zion can be built on the American continent. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you said that as a joke.
I mean, I think there is truth to that. It's that, big wars can cause big geopolitical shifts, right? I kind of don't see Utah actually emerging as as a nation state until, the inevitable collapse of the United States, which I think is going to happen at some point. Not that I'm rooting for it. I'm a proud red-blooded American. But out of these vacuums and these shifts, um, there is a big emergence of, you know, new people, new groups, new nations. So it's hard to say, right? You definitely, like, just for example, the creation of the nation state of Israel kind of turned the Arab world against the West, and whereas during World War I, World War II, they were very much our allies, fighting the Central Powers and the Axis powers. And then there's a shift, it could easily happen in the United States where we fill a void. I'm I kind of had a crazy idea, is I'm like, what if these Epstein files keep coming out? What if they keep, because obviously both Republicans, Democrats know that it could bring down both of them. It could, it's hurting every institution that people trust, right? It's like the Catholic Church is implicated, Ivy League scholarship, the field of medicine, doctors, big pharma are going to that island. There's people in, like, the Secretary of the Navy went there. There's people in the military. And I'm like, if these things actually get brought to light, right? Who do you think people are going to look to next? And I'm kind of like, don't you think people are going to trust us more if all these different institutions are brought down by Epstein files? I feel like that creates a vacuum where we can kind of rise up and gain trust of the public and, do more than just be, we're just one state of the union, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And here's another thing. So we know that upon our house, it will begin. And many people think, well, what's going to happen first is that there's going to be a cleansing of the corruption in the LDS Church. Could it mean that we are the first ones to rise up against the corruption? That might involve cleansing some corruption in our own house. I know I did a video on this Gordon Bowen guy who's excommunicated from the LDS Church, but there's a lot of court documents where he's talking about Jeffrey Epstein, pedophilia type stuff, and literal secret combinations, and he seems to work sometimes with the church office building. Could it be that there's a movement of us within the church where we're like, okay, we're not going to put up with this stuff, and then that is why the world looks to us? Could it be that when this stuff goes down, our church is the first to rise up and rebuild things? There's a lot of things that it could mean. So what do you think there's a connection to that, where the world will look to us and upon this house it will begin?
Mm-hmm. It could be a lot of things, right? It's like, how is it that, it's like the Catholic Church, right? They basically had plundered the world for hundreds of years. They've been around since, the fall of the Roman Empire, roughly. And how is it that this movement that Joseph Smith started has money that's going to surpass them, right? And people kind of like, they'll point to like church wealth as like, greed and corporatism. But my kind of interpretation is that we're just stockpiling for when it hits the fan, right? You're already seeing us go in a bad economic direction with the Strait of Hormuz, right? Where they're able to cut off 20% of the world's oil supply with not that much effort. And the oil, the price of everything, it's already bad. The economy is already bad. Affordability, inflation, cost of living, compared to what your parents had to pay for, it's so bad now. Now, if we're going to sequester the world's oil supply in just a nonsensical war, I'm kind of glad the church has a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And here, yeah. And so here's a couple interesting points on that. So I'm going to bring in scripture and my own personal revelation. So a lot of people, when they're talking about the church's wealth, they don't notice that in the Doctrine and Covenants multiple times, the Lord commands Joseph Smith and the church to build up money, to buy up land, to even get close to mammon. Oh, and so when you're talking, it's echoing. So I'm gonna, I'll mute my mic. Yeah, that was Shane. So, at various times in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord actually commands Joseph Smith and the church to get close to mammon, to get close to the world, to build up resources. But then on the other side, we see in the Redemption of Zion parable that when the enemy enters the Lord's vineyard, it is when they are getting close to the money changers, explicitly in the parable. Like, that is outright what it says, is that they fall asleep when they're getting close to the money changers, and the enemy builds his watchtower in the vineyard. So we see both sides of this idea of it being good versus it being bad. But on my own personal note, in 2023, so for those of you who don't know, I've not always been an active member of the LDS Church. In fact, I'd only really consider myself to be Mormon for the past 2 or 3 years, right? And it was because I started receiving revelation and stuff that kept guiding me towards the Book of Mormon. I kept like, I know it's not the Mormons. And then finally God showed me some stuff. I'm like, okay, I'll submit to you type thing. But in the midst of that, I am really into this secret combination stuff. And I see the stuff about the Great Reset, about the 2030 agenda, and I have a day where I'm just getting so much anxiety. And funny enough, this is actually a really interesting story, and I'm going to say this because I want you guys to know there's no way this could be faked. I was actually getting revelation. So earlier in the day, when I'm on my way to work, I stop at a gas station and I hear a voice in my head. I see this couple who is by the side of the gas station. They're asking for money, and this voice in my head says, give them $20 of gas. And it's at a Maverick, so you can get the prepaid gas and whatnot, right? So I go in there, and I'm getting my stuff. I'm getting coffee. Yeah, sorry, guys, I was drinking coffee. Send me to hell. But I get my stuff, but I don't get $20 of gas. Like, okay, I'll get them some gas, but I won't get them that much because, I'm tight on money or whatever. And as I'm going out to my car, I hear, and I think I got $10 of gas prepaid. I hear a voice in my head. It's very firm now. And it says, I said, get them 20. Go get more. And this time I'm like, okay, and I get 15 more. So it's 25 total. And I hand it to them. And then I noticed, I didn't notice this before, that the woman, she was also pregnant as well. And so later that day, I am panicking about this Great Reset stuff because I'm figuring all this stuff out. And I've tried for my whole life. I'm like, okay, I don't want to believe in God. I believe there's supernatural stuff, but the idea of the church and God was just so cheesy to me. And so I have this voice in my head that is telling me specifically that it's going over stuff that's in the Doctrine and Covenants that I find out to be true later that I couldn't have known. For example, John the Revelator returning. For example, Zion, all this stuff that I wasn't even familiar with. And the voice specifically tells me that the reason why the church is building up resources is for this day. That they need to play it this way, and that at some point, even if the people today don't necessarily know why they're doing it, they were commanded to build up the money and resources for this specific reason, this sort of mark of the beast system, as many are calling it, that's being built with the 2030 agenda. And I hear this voice, and then I also begin receiving revelation about that. It's meant to be soothing for me. I'm seeing how Christ sees us. I'm being calmed down and stuff, but I'm also being told to forgive a specific person who I hadn't seen since like high school, and I hated this person. Like, I hated them. And as far as I knew, they didn't live in the state anymore. They were like at college or something. And so this is now going into my lunch break because I've had this voice running through my head all day. And I had brought lunch that day, so I had no reason to go out for lunch. But I'm like, I'm going to go to the gas station and get lunch. So same gas station as before. And this voice keeps telling me, you need to forgive this person. And so I go into the gas station, get my food, and as I come out, that person who, again, I thought they lived out of state, hadn't seen them in years, they are in the car parked next to mine. So either I'm having a schizophrenic episode and the schizophrenia is really lucky, or I was receiving revelation, and in that same time, that is when I was told that the church's money had been built up for that purpose. And whether the current watchmen on the tower are aware of this fully or not, or some of them are, some of them aren't, I don't know. So, but that is what the Lord told me. And unless the Lord tells me something else, that's what I'm going to go with. And that doesn't mean that there aren't problems in the church. That doesn't mean that on the corporate side, there may be enemies like Gordon Bowen, and I would never kill myself, by the way, who have put their watchtower in the Lord's vineyard due to this need to get close to the money changers, this commandment by the Lord to get close to mammon that we find in the Doctrine and Covenants. But we need to have nuance with this stuff. We need to understand that the Lord is in control. And that's what I would say on that aspect. So it doesn't bother me that the church has a lot of money, but at the same time, when I see stuff like the church donating $1 million or $1 billion or however much was to Mr. Beast, kind of makes me scratch my head. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting when you look at how they diversify their portfolio, right? Like even from like a business standpoint, they don't just, invest and buy up assets in one field, right? It's not like, okay, we're just going to super capitalize on agriculture, right? It's like they dip their toes in like lots of different things, even oil. They've gotten their toes in the oil industry, a lot in the medicine, pharmaceutical, agriculture, like I said. And you don't really do that if you're trying to make a huge profit. In my opinion, that's something you do if you're preparing for something, because if you have the medicine but not the agriculture, or if you have the agriculture but not the ability to produce housing or whatever, it's like you're not, if you are kind of like a welfare system in, let's say, a post-apocalyptic scenario, you're unable to do that if you do not have a diversified portfolio. Does that make sense? So that's kind of like where my interpretation lies, is that we're kind of a doomsday prep religion. We don't use that name, but it's like, it's kind of is in our name, right? Latter-day Saints, like the last days. And then what is the last days of the Book of Mormon? What is the last days of the Bible? It's like wars, rumors of wars, fire and brimstone, and turmoils, So not to say that like the church is perfect, like, not to say that they could do more to, help the poor. But I just kind of feel comforted. I'm like, I feel like the church is going to support me when my own government can't, if that were necessary.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to respond to this comment real quick. And here's another thing. If you guys would like your comment to specifically be on screen, you can send a super chat, and I will make sure that Shane gives the money directly to me, right? If you don't want to pay Shane, I'll be like, these super chats are for me, by the way. So if you want me or Latter-day Avenger to answer your question, send in super chats, because other channels, when they're doing these live streams, I get a ton of super chats. In fact, I'm pretty sure when I was trying to get the Deuteronomist reforms to like go mainstream in its knowledge, I had to have spent like $500 at least on Ward Radio super chats, just sending them in to get them talk about the Deuteronomist reforms, talk about King Josiah, talk about that. Like, I'm serious. I spent a lot of money on those guys. But this chat says Netanyahu is alive. He was at a coffee shop today or yesterday. I think I showed this, but that video of Netanyahu is actually very clearly AI, just like the six-finger one. So a friend of mine actually just sent me on YouTube. I'm going to pull this up. So his pocket and his hands change shape on camera in the coffee shop. So here I'm going to try and play this. Is this the right video? Oh, he's alive. He wants you to count his fingers on camera. Okay, so here it is. So in this video, it shows that the shape of his pocket is actually changing shape on camera. Like, literally. So they notice the people being like, he has 6 fingers in it, and he tells them to count the fingers in it. And the people who are researching it also found that this specific coffee shop that he is in is closed. So it's not even open, and that because of the stuff going on in Israel right now, a lot of these coffee shops are actually closed. And so he could very well be alive, and he mentioned, ooh, thank you for the super chat, Colonel Dad 39311. That's $10 into Latter Day Chad's pocket because he does these and everything for free. But I would also recommend, if you have a question or a comment, putting that on the super chats as well, so that we can answer it. But shout out to Colonel Dad 9311, because he doesn't have a comment. I'm going to say this. So Shane's Oracle code, it's this Jewish numerology thing. He calls it Oracle code to be cool. And if you guys want, I'll just run your Oracle codes for free. They were charging to make those because they're trying to make an app or something. Just DM me if you want yours done. I'll just do that. But Colonel Dad 9311 and 9113 is actually Shane's Oracle code. So interesting. 9311, 9113, looking at patterns there. But to refresh, you were saying that there might be other reasons potentially that Netanyahu, and I'm just going to leave that on the screen so we can see that. Unless somebody else has a super chat or there's another interesting comment I'd like to pin, I'll just leave whatever the latest super chat is up there. But to sort of refresh, you were saying that there might be some strategic reasons why Netanyahu, even if he's alive, would be making fake AI figures having to do with geocaches and stuff.
Yeah, so you can actually, in a lot of instances, you can get someone's location through a video. You can't, so they're seeing it in Ukraine where happened where a soldier will post a Snapchat or an Instagram thing, and then that position gets hit with artillery, right? I actually did a military exercise where it was like a war game where we were shooting at each other with stim rounds. They're kind of like these plastic rounds that when they hit, they blow up chalk. It freaking hurts. They actually and they had these cyber warfare dudes that were out there, and they actually were able to get people's location from their Snapchat, and they actually mock killed a dude because of a Snapchat. And so if you're posting on these videos and they can somehow get a hold of the data file of the video, they can get your geolocation. So it's tactically not smart to be posting videos at all. Even if nothing about your background gives away where you are, trust me, the cyber world is crazy. They can figure it out. So that's my counter argument, I kind of I tend to lean more he's alive. It's I remember there was a time where Biden went missing for a long time. They were saying he was dead, blah blah blah. He just came out, right? It is a fog of war, you don't know exactly what's going on. But it's not impossible they can hit Netanyahu. It's 2024 they bombed his house with a drone. So yeah, that's my take. So
Sorry, I was trying to unmute the mic. So that's really interesting. One thought on that is it would be very strategic for them to even think that Netanyahu is dead, even if he's alive, right? Because that could be a strategic thing where they hide him away and stuff. But for whatever reason, they are making it AI. So you have to ask yourself what's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, whether it's in Ukraine or in Russia and all this stuff, and is it a strategic thing? But why do you think so many people are against this war? Because it seems like it's both the left and the right that no one really wants this war. The American people in general, they just don't want this war. And it's a pretty bipartisan issue where everyone feels like we're being pushed into this war or that we're being manipulated into this war. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's not something we see very often.
Yeah, so I think it's just at this point it's overkill, right? It's we had October 7th, right? Everyone remembers October 7th. Israel had the right to respond. I don't think anyone denies that, right? And then it's they turned the Gaza Strip into an uninhabitable parking lot. You can debate how many civilians die. You can debate if they're targeting civilians or not. The thing is you can just do a before and after on Google Images. It is total war destruction. It looks like the scene out of Mad Max, and it's why are they doing that? Why are they doing it at the hospitals? Why are they doing that to? And it seemed already overkill for October 7th. It's okay, let's say justice has been served, right? And then like last summer we had Operation Midnight Hammer, where Iran was kind of just chilling, minding their own business. And then sure enough, we send in B2 Spirits, and according to Trump, who alluded to it being the greatest military operation since D-Day, he said we took out their nuclear program and sent it back 25 years. And it was a successful operation, right? Like Iran did a loose retaliation, but we ended up kind of walking away unscathed, right? No American forces died. So it's like, okay, Gaza's gone. According to Trump, we obliterated their nuclear program. Why are we doing this again? Like, when does it stop? And I think Americans see that. It's not like, at least with Iraq and Afghanistan, there was the rhetoric of, hey, our Twin Towers just got bombed and 3,000 Americans died by Islamic terrorists, right? There's none of that going on, right? And, we can kind of like speculate, oh, is there a false flag going to happen? Like, I kind of don't think they even need one, because it's like, it's so clear that like we are the aggressors and we started this war. And I hate to say it as like a patriotic American, right? And I think that's one of the many reasons why people are against it. Also, just the failures of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, 20 years, like 3,000 to 5,000 Americans dead. And then they ended up just kind of taking it back. It's like we don't. And then Iran's actually like fighting better than we thought. They have these cheap drones that are cost like $20,000 drones that are costing us millions to take down. And then we're going to see prices go up. It's like, there's so many reasons why people don't support it. And I honestly don't really understand the premise of it. I'm like, is Trump just doing this to boost his ego? It does beg the question, is there blackmail on Trump? Because usually Trump's the guy that doesn't listen to anybody. He kind of likes to be the man in charge, the boss. Why is he obeying someone who's far less powerful than him? Almost like Mark Antony and Cleopatra from the Roman Empire. It's like, why are you, submitting to a lapdog, when you're the elephant in the room? It's just, it's dumb. I kind of understand why Americans do not want this war. And maybe it's supposed to happen, right? Maybe it is supposed to just cause chaos so that the second coming can eventually happen. But, I'm in the military. It's like I would go if called, but, in good conscience, I wouldn't feel like I'm the good guy in the war. My rationale would be like, okay, I'm fighting for the soldiers next to me. I'm not fighting to defend my homeland. I don't know if you ever saw that meme that's like, look how close Iran put their country to our military bases. It's like, we're clearly the aggressors, right? And this might backfire.
Yeah, and one thing that stands out a lot to me is this distrust that the American people on both sides of the political spectrum have for the government, where, let's say there's an actual attack from Iran. People are going to assume it's a false flag because it just feels like the United States government has lost any and all trust in the populace on both sides. And it kind of feels like they're just sort of scrambling for a distraction, and maybe some people think that the Iran war is why, like, hey, let's get patriotic and unify, and they're trying to distract from things like the Epstein files to steady the arc, if you will. And here's another thing. Could Donald Trump, because we're talking about him being anointed by God, could Donald Trump be the man appointed by God in Doctrine and Covenants 85 to steady the ark of God? And many times people think the ark of God is the church and that the man appointed will be a prophet, but could it be a reference to the United States? And right now, Donald Trump is trying to steady the ark of God with the Epstein files, and he's trying to set in these things, and then that's when the church comes, because we know based on what Joseph Smith said, there's going to be a modern day King David figure who comes in the future, but in Isaiah there's certain suggestions that we collectively are also the servant, right? So could that be what happens, is that us, the servant, the church, we are the ones who come and steady the ark of God, which may be the promised land. That's an interesting thought. But we've got some super chats here that we're going to take a minute to read. So from Big Boy 221, G1 GLD, I don't know. Do you think Joseph Smith is on the earth right now? I'll let you answer that one first. Do you think Joseph Smith's on the earth right now?
Maybe he is an angel, right? It's like you look at Adam, who became Michael, and then Noah, who became Gabriel. Maybe he's some angel we don't know about.
Well, I certainly, I'm going to actually do an episode on this. I think it is almost for certain that the 7 dispensation heads are the 7 archangels premortally. In fact, and I'm going to go into this in the Doctrine and Covenants and in the book of Revelation to do a whole video about that, because we've done a lot of videos breaking down how the 7 angels in the book of Revelation actually represent the 7 dispensation heads, and they actually line up pretty well. But something that's new is that in D&C 88, it actually straight up says the 7th angel in the book of Revelation is Michael, and the other angels line up very well with the dispensation heads. So I would say Joseph Smith is definitely an archangel. I don't even think it should something that should be questioned, that somebody of that important of a role would be one of the archangels. And there are 7 main archangels, or a quorum of 7 archangels, because we know there's more than just 7 in like the book of Enoch, and 7 dispensation heads, and we know at least 2 of the 3 dispensation heads are already confirmed to be archangels. So it's like it's pretty straightforward, I think. But what are your thoughts on that, of Joseph Smith being an archangel, and do you have an idea of who you think he could be if he was an archangel?
I kind of agree. If I had to guess, I think he is one, but I think it's kind of a John the Revelator situation where he's not, openly revealing himself. He's just kind of behind the scenes. So, and then do we have the name of all 7, right? Because I know some of them come from like Hebrew tradition. Is Uriel one of them, or is that just? Yeah.
So there's Uriel. There's the names I've specifically heard for Joseph Smith now is Barachel, Phanuel, and most recently Ragel, when me and Stanley Heaton did a video about Joseph Smith returning, or at least the mantle of Joseph Smith returning. Like he might pass the rod to someone else or something. But that is what Stanley Heaton said he believed. I've heard multiple other people say they believe he is Phanuel, and I feel a sneeze come on as I'm saying this. So is Joseph Smith Phanuel? And I've also heard the name Barachel based on some things that are in the Doctrine and Covenants. So could Joseph Smith, and here's another thing, is that there's different ways he could return. I think based on some of a comment I saw from this person earlier, he's assuming that Joseph Smith is essentially going to reincarnate, or as like Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball called it, multiple mortal probations, where there is a large number of people who think that Joseph Smith is going to die and come back as another person in mortality. There's a whole movement called the Doctrine of Christ that believes that, and I've actually met their leader, or their founder, but I think that's what they're implying. So whether in angelic form or a new probation or whatever people are expecting, could Joseph Smith be on the earth right now? Certainly. And I would think that if Joseph Smith is here, he's not going to let his identity be known, right? If, for example, if he's an angel, certainly he can disguise himself. Certainly he can make himself look however he wants. If you're in the temple, Peter, James, and John, they show up and they don't disclose their true identity. Right? So imagine, Joseph, go down there and check on them, and don't disclose your identity, and return and report, right? That's what's happening in the temple there. Or if if multiple mortalities ends up being a true doctrine. Again, the returned Joseph Smith certainly wouldn't be announcing to everyone that he was Joseph Smith, and it would just be up to the Spirit, I suppose, to bear witness of people. And then we have another super chat by Colonel Dad 9311. There is a lot going on that we are not seeing. Satan is certainly manipulating things. With that gold and silver will I buy up. And this is an old line that's been taken out of the endowment where, part of it's still in the endowment, I think, but in the original endowment, he talked about buying up false priests and popes and governments and all this stuff, and heavily alluding to secret combinations in the endowment. And just below that, I'll bring that up because he seems to be responding to the other super chat. Colonel Dad 9311 says, wait, let me hide this and bring this up. I would say that Joseph Smith is active on this world still. Lots of work to do. It is his dispensation, and he has always been active in this. So if you guys have any super chats, feel free to send them in. I'm going to leave this latest super chat by Colonel Dad on the screen unless something else comes up that I want to put on. So again, if you have any super chats, anything you want read, send it in. I will read it, and I'll make sure that Shane gives the money to me, right? But to that, have you read the prophecies about Joseph Smith returning in the last days? And because there's certainly people who believe that, and there's kind of a split, which is actually partially what this last video was on, where a lot of the prophecies that people attribute to being an end times David figure, they're like, well, actually, that's going to be Joseph Smith returning, resurrected, or as an angel, or reincarnated, or whatever. Do you think that he has a future role prior to the second coming?
Part of the second coming as an angel, yes. I don't think he's like reincarnated. I don't subscribe to that idea. But obviously, like, the millennium is going to be 1,000 years long, and things are going to happen during the millennium. There will be, there's still going to be opposition during the millennium. There's going to be a battle before the millennium, which is Armageddon, and then a battle at the end, which is Gog and Magog. I think that he will be a very clear and present figure as a resurrected body. And maybe he's doing stuff. It's like Joseph Smith talked about, when he was in his mortal life, he talked about there were several reasons. One of them gets a little bit of heat, but he talked about an angel with a flaming sword threatening to strike him down if he didn't do X, Y, or Z. One of them was polygamy, but there were some other things as well. I guess a side question is like, who was that angel? Was that Noah? Was that Gabriel? Was that I don't know. But I think it's clearly
It could have been Samael,
an angel, right?
So
actually, one of my followers messaged me this theory, and I thought it was interesting. He sent me some sources for it too. His theory. Okay, this is gonna be kind of a wild tangent. I don't know if you're ready. This isn't a belief that I have, but I think it's interesting. That it gave me some food for thought. So what he was saying was that, like, obviously these prophets that receive angelic visitations, they still have agency, right? It's like Joseph Smith could have said no to Moroni. So what he was saying is his theory was that Muhammad was a prophet because there is scholarly evidence that it kind of began as a Christian movement. That's real. That he was called to be a prophet, but he rejected and basically, how do I say this? Didn't, let's say, choose the right. I'm not saying I subscribe to this idea, but I'm like, there are, weird similarities between Joseph Smith, Muhammad, and an angel. You even have another interesting thing about angels. This is a random. I'm going on a tangent, but my ADHD is kicking in. But anyway, what's interesting was that, if you ever saw the Joan of Arc documentary that was done by BYU, you had Cossé and you had Holland, and in the documentary they both say that her visions were divine and inspired by God. Cossé straight up says that. And then Holland says we owe it to her to take her at her word of what she saw. So I'm like, do these angelic visions, and obviously Joan of Arc wasn't a prophet, but are they giving people higher callings in life for non-prophetic roles? And maybe Joseph Smith is doing that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that depends
You're
on
muted. Hold
how.
on.
Oh,
I can't.
am I muted still? Am I muted? Can you hear me? You can't. They cannot hear me. In the audience, can you hear me?
I cannot hear you. I think it's on your end. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
No. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I could hear you the whole time. And what I was going to say is that a lot of that is sort of a semantics thing. And here's one thing I say. I agree with Muhammad receiving revelation. And my perspective might be a bit different from the perspective of people who have grown up their entire life just very strictly Mormon, very surrounded by Mormon culture and stuff. I believe that all religions who have been successful were tapping into something spiritual. It doesn't mean everything they were getting was true, but it means they were tapping into it. And I would also say maybe Joseph Smith, as a human, not God himself, maybe he got one or two things that were not 100% true. Not to say they were false, but like how in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord says, well, it's said that there will be eternal punishment, but eternal is one of my names and it's my punishment. So as we progress further and are open to more truth, we have unveiled that maybe some of the things we understood previously weren't exactly what we thought they meant, right? And we also have times where Joseph Smith himself is actually on record receiving false revelation and repenting from that. And there's a few examples that come to mind of that. So rather than it being black and white, I think that it's on a spectrum, right? And I also think that the picture is bigger than many people would say, because I tell this to people all the time. I tell this to LDS people and non-LDS people alike. And it kind of bothers both of them when I say this. And I always say, well, I think that the non-Mormons are going to realize that the LDS Church and the Mormons were a lot more important than they thought it was. And then I also follow that by saying, and I think the Mormons are going to have to realize that maybe they weren't quite as important as they thought they were, meaning that there will be other factors, other important things. In the millennium, it will be anybody who is living a terrestrial law, right? So it's not just that, oh, it's only going to be Mormons on the earth. It's like, no, the millennium is going to be anybody living that terrestrial law. And I'm sure that we will receive more clarity on doctrine and what is exactly correct, because there's a lot of stuff that we haven't received any sort of revelation or any sort of clarity on, that we're just taking our best shots in the dark about trying to piece together certain things, which I also think people should go a bit softer on the Catholics for their creeds, because in some ways we're doing that a little bit. We're trying to figure things out and just going, based on what we think the Spirit's telling us. So I would say I definitely believe that Muhammad was receiving revelation. And how much? I don't know. But there are certain things, interestingly enough, in the Quran that we find in Gnostic Gospels, like the story of Jesus Christ building, he made like a clay pigeon or dove or something,
and they
and
found that in
breathed
the
life
Gospel of
into it.
Thomas later on. Yeah, that was interesting. Also, it talks about like eternal families, which isn't in the Bible. It talks about being with your posterity in heaven. That sounds more like us than a Trinitarian take, right? But no, I agree. Like, when it's interesting because like when you read Wilford Woodruff's his journal, when he was doing baptism of the dead for like certain people, he basically made this list of names. He called them the eminent spirits. You know the story. And he called them some of the greatest spirits that ever lived. And none of those guys were LDS. He had George Washington as a high priest. He had Christopher Columbus. He had Horatio Nelson, Duke of Wellington, founding fathers. Jane Austen was in there. Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Catholics, right? So, and just watch the it's hard to watch that BYU documentary about Joan of Arc and not think she was divine. And so I agree with you with this point. So
Yeah, and it may be that our understanding of what a prophet is needs adjustment, right? For example, in Doctrine and Covenants 133, it says that before the second coming, there will be prophets who come from the north country, meaning people who are outside of our church and are called prophets that will come. That's something to talk about. And then we see, for example, are you familiar with Brandon Biggs?
no.
So Brandon Biggs, they call him the Trump prophet. So essentially, this might ring
Oh
some
yeah,
bells.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, he's this evangelical pastor. He doesn't even call himself a prophet, but he certainly has the gift of prophecy in a lot of things. Not everything he said has come true, but he has gotten some very, very specific things correctly, where he sees the bullet grazed by Trump's ear in the assassination attempt, and he describes that months before it happens. So would Brandon Biggs be considered a prophet? And here's another thing. Brigham Young certainly was receiving revelation, and you could argue based on our current doctrines that not all of the revelation Brigham Young was receiving was true, but he certainly was tapped in. He was getting stuff. He was claiming to have visions and whatnot. But Brigham Young himself made a point where he was like, the prophet is Joseph Smith. I'm just the president of the church. Don't call me the prophet. I don't remember the exact quote, but Brigham Young said something along the lines of that. And it wasn't until much later that it became a thing in the church where we called the president of the church the prophet. For the longest time, it was just the president. So what connotates a prophet, right? Is it position? Is it authority? Is it the gift of prophecy? Is it having visions? We go to Moses, where there are these two men at the base of the mountain that in the book of Numbers, who a young man down there begins to prophesy, and they go to Moses saying, "You're the prophet. This guy can't be prophesying." And Moses replies by saying, "Jealous for my sake, are you? I would that all the Lord's people be prophets." So we have to ask yourself, what does that mean? And could Joan of Arc have been a prophet, right?
Yep.
By that definition, like what is the definition? We don't even really have a definition.
Well, what's interesting is like when you look at I can't remember if it was Greek or Hebrew, but the word prophet is used interchangeably as the word messenger. And then I think there was okay, I could be wrong, but I think like in Greek, messenger and prophet could be used interchangeably, and then in Hebrew, angel and messenger could be used interchangeably. So it's like, are you also, in a sense, like when we're missionaries, right? We're extensions of the 12 apostles and their calling. That's why we're called elders, right? You know, I think there's a difference between a prophet and the prophet, you know.
Yeah, and so here's what someone says. $1 billion of worth of game says, a prophet is called / chosen before we came. It is the individuals that are chosen to speak for the Lord. And here's what I would ask. Again, what does it mean to speak for the Lord? Specifically, right? Because this is another issue we run into where when we're talking about ongoing revelation, there will be people like, well, they just changed the garments, so now we have sleeveless garments. That's a new revelation. Or is a revelation where it's like Doctrine and Covenants, where it's like, thus saith the Lord, and then it's the voice of the Lord going. Like, where is the line of when the Lord is speaking? And this is a common argument we're having up. What's the difference between a prophet speaking as a man versus speaking as a prophet? Because oftentimes, retroactively, and I'm not denying anybody's a prophet or anything like that, but we commonly see people who, if somebody gets something wrong or a policy or something is changed later on, they will then say retroactively, well, he was speaking as a man, not a prophet. And I've basically just come to the conclusion it's on a spectrum of what inspiration is, but that when somebody's saying, thus saith the Lord, that's the Lord speaking, right, through them. And that's why they say, thus saith the Lord, is because they are speaking as the mouthpiece of the Lord. It's not them speaking. And that other things can be inspired, but again, it is on a spectrum. So we have to ask ourselves what these things mean, because we don't really have answers, right?
The scripture that comes to mind is like all like everything that's good comes from God. Everything bad comes from the devil, right? So that's my opinion. Looks like there's another question. Yep, I agree. I've received revelation, through a dream before that I needed to do something before a car wreck, and I got in a car wreck. I'm not gonna go around saying I'm a prophet, right? But
Well, that does beg the question. Does that make you, based on certain definitions, if you prophesied, I will get in a car wreck, by definition, would that make you a prophet? Because we have to understand what is the definition of a prophet. We really don't have a solid definition, right?
yeah,
Where what we might say it is might differ, and we have to ask ourselves, what are the prophets from the North Country? And that's where it brings in, is because we do have this prophecy. Could people like Brandon Biggs be the prophets from the North Country? If there are people prophesying, I don't know, right? I don't have that answer. But it does bring nuance when we're talking about people like Mohammed, like people of Joan of Arc. Could they have been considered prophets? Was Lehi a prophet? Because in the context of the Book of Mormon, he was just a random guy. He didn't have any special authority at Jerusalem, but then he's visited by an angel and told, you need to take your family away, right? So I think it's more of a spectrum, and that the Lord will use people as he sees fit, right? And that perhaps a prophet is kind of like a man-made title for what people call these people who rise up and do these remarkable prophetic things.
yeah. It's at the end of the day, there's like debating semantics. Like I do subscribe to the idea of stewardship, right? It's like like I can receive revelation from my family, or like if I'm a bishop, for my ward, I kind of would. I wouldn't, if I had a dream that someone else, hey, you need to do this. I think we can be prophets, but I do think it falls within the bounds of stewardship. So
Yeah, and this is actually something I'm going to be going into on. Actually, I'll read this here. Jeremiah was the prophet of his time, but Lehi was also a prophet. And did Jeremiah and Lehi even know each other? I don't know. There's no indication that they directly knew each other, but they were around at the same time. And so was the prophet Jeremiah exactly as we understand it today? Because I don't think that they had a quorum of 12 apostles in Lehi's time or in Jeremiah's time. That wasn't something that was on the earth until Jesus Christ came. So, it's very much a semantics thing. We have to look at what the Hebrew word for prophet even is and what it truly means. And maybe the way we use certain words back then aren't the way we use them today. But as I was saying, one thing I'm going to make a video on is some school of prophets like stuff, because here's another thing. Joseph Smith, he had his quorum of 12 guys, and he was going through, and I'm going to say this, I think the people in Joseph Smith's day, overall, they had more faith than us. They absolutely had more faith in that generation than in our generation, so much so that when the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, there were angels on the roof of the temple that they literally saw. But Joseph Smith still had this thing called the School of Prophets, where despite the fact that he had already given these individuals the authority to be apostles, he was actually training them to receive revelation. And the way he talks about it, it's like it's a muscle, it's a skill, it's something you learn. So is it something that, in order to usher in the second coming, we need to all be that attuned to the Spirit? Joseph Smith seemed to think so, but it's a semantics thing of how you define that. That's what I would say, because one person's understanding of it, for example, in Lehi's day, a prophet might just be anybody who receives dreams or visions, right? It might not be even an authority position.
mm-hmm.
But we have John Simmons. There were prophetesses also mentioned in the Bible. There were, right? And we know in our church today, women don't hold the priesthood, at least not the same priesthood that men have, because in the temple, they don't have to be ordained or anything. They're giving people blessings, right? So is there more to be restored? Is there going to be more information that comes? We don't really know. but it's an interesting thing to talk about. So have we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints taken on a false understanding of prophets and revelation, thinking only one can receive? Isn't that like the prophet of the people at the time of Moses? And actually that seems to be something that Joseph Smith talks a lot about. If you go back to D&C 84, that seems to be what the condemnation the Lord is placing on the people is that they don't want to receive revelation, and that he compares them to the children of Moses who wouldn't go out to see the Lord themselves. So I do think Zion is not what people think it is. I think that the church's purpose is to bring Zion, and that Zion will be a people of one mind and one heart, and that it might be that they are so much attuned to the Spirit that they are able to just tap in like that, right? And I think that's sort of what Joseph Smith was trying to do, and that it's up to our agency to be able to receive revelation, because Joseph Smith seemed to suggest it wasn't something magic, it was like a muscle you could train. Billionaire Dollars Vort says, I have found that when I have visions, they're only something I'm going to experience. It's usually a life-changing event. Scotty Davis says, also a dream is within the physical mind. A vision requires spiritual mind and eyes to be opened. Or Vida Bravo says, or the people don't feel competent to receive the revelation. And I actually, in the video that I don't know if it's going up tomorrow on Monday about the woman of Zion, that's actually one of the points I talk about, is that for context, the woman of Zion is compared to a woman. It's much like with the prophet Hosea, how when they were practicing idolatry, the Lord commanded his servant Hosea to marry a prostitute so that he would know what it's like when you go chasing after other gods. And so I touch on that with the barren woman and how she seems ashamed and unwilling to approach the Lord. So could it be that the people of Zion feel like that they can't approach the Lord, and that, I don't know. That's one of the things we go over in that video with the Isaiah 54 prophecy. I agree, and Scott Davis says again, I agree, spiritual mind can be opened without necessity of eyes being opened. And TK says, you guys are solid gold. So if you guys have any comments, any questions, feel free to leave a chat or a super chat. If it's a super chat, I will definitely put it on screen. I'm just going to pin whatever the last one was, because they paid money for it. Can I even? Yeah, so I'm just going to leave that pinned up there for context. So if you want to send in a super chat and make sure that your comment gets noticed, do that. So back to the Iran stuff, because we kind of went off on a bit of a tangent. Do you think that God truly did anoint Donald Trump? Why or why not? And what do you think they think that means? Because with us, we would think, well, Jesus Christ himself came down and laid his hands on Donald Trump and anointed him. What do you think that Donald Trump thinks that means?
I wouldn't say he's anointed in like our Latter-day Saint, concept of anointing, right? Like, I feel like ultimately, like, if you're looking at this from like a prophecy perspective, it's like, this is like war and turmoil and economic, it could cause famine. It could, like, this is a bad thing that's happening, right? And that's not necessarily like our Christian, or even more specifically a Latter-day Saint view, that Jesus is doing that. And I'm not going to be like, okay, well, Donald Trump is Satan. But I sure think that, starting a war to usher in the second coming, I like that. Ultimately, war is a bad thing, right? It's like the Book of Mormon, like, it's like, I, the Lord of hosts, do not delight in the shedding of blood. And it's like, what they're, and then Captain Moroni makes warfare sound like it needs to be something that's in defense of a people. I don't think this is a Christ-like role. I don't think it's a Christ-like mission, you know. I think it's you know, I don't even think necessarily it's supposed to happen. I think it's just something that will happen that was foreseen by the prophets of old, if that makes sense.
Well, that does kind of bring me a little bit to the topic of that video I was talking about the woman of Zion. So, just a sneak preview. What the Lord does to Hosea's wife, who represents Zion, is that he causes things to happen to her to force her to return to Hosea, representing the Lord, forcing his people to return to him, right? And again, there's a whole video about this, about how Isaiah 54, and there's a lot of clues in the book of Revelation and Isaiah that Isaiah 54 is, and it's also 3rd Nephi 22, is not just a prophecy about Israel, but about the wife of the Davidic servant in Isaiah, which I honestly think that Mary Magdalene may have been a barren woman when she married Jesus Christ, and that through his power they were able to have children. And that
wasn't Abraham's wife barren too? Yeah, it's like there's this common theme in the scriptures of a barren woman for some reason.
Yeah, and it's always a prophet or an important figure who marries this barren woman. And I think it goes back to this Isaiah 54 prophecy because, for example, in Isaiah 54, it says that the woman's husband shall be one day called the Lord of the whole earth, which, as Avram Gileadi, the most famous Isaiah scholar, points out, Isaiah is about ascension, of where Jesus Christ was the Son of God who became a Son of Man. The end times David in Isaiah appears to be a normal human person, a son of man, who becomes adopted as a son of God or the son of Jehovah. And so this ascension process to take that on seems to be in Isaiah 54 as well, where it's an ascending figure who is not already a god who came down, but becomes a god. But we see this pattern in the scriptures. So not just with Hosea's wife, where sometimes the Lord himself is the one causing things to happen, where oftentimes we'd like to blame Satan for things. But Satan is actually a title, and oftentimes in Jewish tradition, Satan is not a bad guy. He is an angel sent on behalf of God to test the people. The most famous example would be the book of Job, where Satan is an angel in the Lord's council, who he has all these angels before him. And Satan is there, and he's like, well, how about I go test your servant Job and show you that he's not so loyal? And then the Lord gives Satan authority and permission to go test Job. And I don't think that that was Lucifer. I think that was like Samael, or a destroying angel, an angel sent on behalf of God. And even in the temple, we have Lucifer. What does he say? I'm just doing that which has been done on other worlds. And then God's like, okay, well, guess we're going to use this guy for the opposition, because there's always got to be some opposition, right? So could God be causing this war? Could God be causing things like the Epstein files? Could God be causing certain things to force people to wake up? Just like how the Lord forces the woman of Zion to wake up and return to her husband.
Or isn't another way of looking at, like, God withdraws, and then whatever force, whether you, I don't know, Satan, Lucifer, the opposition takes over. You know, I think where I would stretch it is like, okay, maybe he's withdrawing to set things in motion, you know? But I don't think, at the end of the day, we have agency, right? And a lot of times suffering and pain is a product of the agency of man. It's not just God ordained these Israeli fighter jets to go bomb Iran to usher the second coming. It's like Netanyahu has agency. He has an ego. He can be like, okay, I want to go down the history books. I'm going to lob some missiles. Like, there's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and one thing I might add, like going back to the temple, is there's an implication that, yeah, at times God himself will cause opposition for our testing. But with Lucifer, God's like, oh, this guy's already against us. We'll use him. So it could be an example of that where it's like, oh, there's bad people. I'll use that to wake them up, to test them, to see how they will respond, right? Because even in the book of Abraham, what does the Lord say? He's like, we shall go down there. Or I think it was Michael who might have actually said it in the book of Abraham, the one like unto God. But someone in the book of Abraham is saying, let us go down there and test them to see if they will do everything that the Lord their God commands of them. So we have to understand, if God is seeing who will be his noble and great ones, if who will inherit the mansions, who will ascend and become like him, he's going to test us, right? And that's why I think we're going to need the constant guiding influence of the Holy Ghost, is because God might allow some opposition to come our way to see how we respond to stuff, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess, yeah, and it is within our doctrine to say that our mortal realm is a test. It's a provisional phase. But I'm kind of like, well, what if, okay, let's assume Jesus has anointed this Iran war. Like, what is it, like, what's the significance of Iran and Persia? Like why them, Like, do you think it's like, okay, this is going to cause war to pour across all nations? Like, America's going to deplete their air defense, and then they're going to reroute it from the Pacific to the Middle East, and that's going to embolden China to take Taiwan
Well,
with even more drones and even more economic disruption. But I'm like, what is the significance of, because obviously it's like the prophecy, much of Isaiah or old sermons from the Joseph Smith and his inner circle, it's like, it surrounds Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, and like Iran is pretty far away. So I'm like, I don't know. I guess my question to you is like, well, what would be the point of it being Iran?
Well, a couple thoughts on this. One is maybe it doesn't have to be Iran. Maybe it could be any, and that's just what God happens to be using. Another idea is, have you ever seen the movie Dune? Dune 2, specifically.
No.
Dune and Dune 2? Okay, for context, those who don't know what Dune is like, it is like this. It's like the more serious version of Star Wars, and Star Wars was actually sort of inspired about, but it's like this ancient space religion, this sort of messianic religion, and they've been crossing bloodlines and doing all this specific stuff to try and make their Messiah come. And the main character, Paul, he's actually someone who is set up to potentially be that Messiah. And his mother is a part of this sort of cult, if you would call it, of these space witches that are trying to make this Messiah come forth by crossing the bloodlines. And so part of what they do is that they cause, in some ways, the prophecies to come true. So if you have to ask yourself, how does God just send a vision to someone and they see the future? Because wouldn't that take away agency if the future was set in stone? Or does God have various plans and various contingencies set up to cause the prophecies to come true? Like, I don't think God's just like, I saw the future, that's what's going to happen. I think God, he prophesies what he intends to happen, and then one way or another, the Lord's plans for what's going to happen. That's one potential thought, because that seems to be what's happening in Dune, where it's like Dune is something supernatural. He is this messianic figure, but in some sense, they are specifically causing the prophecies to happen. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's like the ultimate prophecy is, this is okay. Like, if I had to guess, I'm not prophesying here. But ultimately the prophecy is like all nations assembled against Israel for battle, and then we have the Mount of Olives, right? You kind of have to mess up pretty bad to get all nations assembled against you. And could this be the starting point that turns the world against Israel? Because you're seeing it it's like Europe is kind of cutting ties, Russia, China, like I'm not saying it's justified, but people are very, just watch the last UN assembly. They didn't walk. Half the people didn't walk out when Putin spoke. They didn't walk out when Xi Jinping spoke. Like when Netanyahu got up, half the people left. Like you can watch the video. It was when he spoke at the last UN. Can't remember what the name of the conference was, but I'm like, is this what turns the hearts against Israel? And when you read Jesus the Christ, it's like, I do believe they are, there's a question.
I was just pointing that on screen because it was interesting. But here's a question though. Do you think maybe that's the point?
Yeah, I think that's more plausible.
So
happening.
going back to Dune. So going back to Dune, they're trying to make their Messiah appear. So they're causing all these things. There's this holy war and all this stuff that has to happen. And the Jews are trying to usher in their Messiah. And you are literally hearing reports from the military, from both our military, it's to usher in the Messiah. We hear stuff from the Jewish military. This is to usher in their Messiah because this is what must happen. And so, do you think that could be what's happening? And that maybe, are you familiar with the term karmic retribution?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Okay, so for those who don't understand, here's what karmic retribution is. Say, this is a spiritual belief that many people in the world, including elites, including the people who went to Jeffrey Epstein's island, believe. Say, I want to poison Latter-day Avenger here. So I could just poison this white monster, give it to him, and then he dies, but then there would be spiritual consequences for me doing that. But it's like a cheat code in the game. And the Talmud is full of all these little cheat codes to get around these rules. So I put some poison. A Goyim's talking about the Talmud. But I put some poison in this white monster, and then I write on it, this is poisoned. And then I give it to him. If he still drinks it, he is choosing, by those spiritual laws that certain people believe in, he is choosing to drink that poison.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is what Andrew Tate, this is where I get it from. Andrew Tate's the one who talked about it. I've heard other people talk about it. And it makes sense. That's allegedly what the elites in the world believe, of various nations. So based on that belief system, it is possible that people like Donald Trump are saying this. And you have to be specific. Like, they're reporting that he's saying, we're doing this to bring back Jesus Christ. But what if he's just saying, I was anointed by Christ? And he's not saying Jesus. He's saying, I was anointed by the Messiah to usher that in. Well, what Messiah? Right? And he's openly saying that. And if they happen to interpret it as Jesus Christ, well, that's what they believe. They believe they have to tell you, yes. And I talked about this a lot in my video I did on how the CIA documents confirm what Joseph Smith was talking about in Lectures on Faith, how the CIA released documents about manifestation, astral projection, explaining how spiritual powers work and giving tutorials with results that it does work. And I am going to do another video on that sort of thing. But they openly admit it, and that's like a spiritual law, is that you have to share your intention. And you know what? I will say my intentions when I'm doing Zion Media, my Instagram, has always been to wake people up. That is my intention. So that nobody misconstrues anything. I want people to have faith, to be able to receive revelation, to have spiritual gifts, to wake up, and to be able to redeem Zion and fulfill the prophecies that we are meant to fulfill. Because I'm somebody who had God himself not told me, you need to be a member of the LDS Church. It is true. Had he not told me that, I definitely wouldn't be. Speaking of CIA, have you heard the news about Tucker Carlson and Iran? I have not. Do you mind putting those in the chat? Do you know what he's talking about?
I guess, yeah, I read somewhere that Tucker said the CIA or something was like spying on him over basically making sure it wasn't like treason or espionage or something like that.
It's interesting when they talk about Tucker Carlson like that. But then we have people like Ted Cruz who are saying, well, I joined the United States Senate to help Israel. And he's like one of the top AIPAC donors or whatever. And then like you question him on this, he's like, oh, so you hate the Jews. It's like, I didn't say anything about the Jews. I said that you said you joined our government to help a foreign government, right? And it's a very interesting thing where we as Latter-day Saints are in a unique position where we do believe in the literal gathering of Israel. So I think that gives us a little more leeway to talk about these things where it's like, yeah, we believe the Jews are supposed to gather in their homeland. Yeah, we believe in a literal gathering of Israel. I don't believe that, our politicians, I don't know if maybe Ted Cruz is being completely honest. I don't know. But it sure is a fascinating thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is like, because the whole adoption thing is like a Latter-day Saint idea. So I feel like to the Catholics, to the Jews, or I'm sorry, the Catholics, the Protestants, and the Orthodox, it kind of makes sense that Jews would have to band together, right? For us, we kind of like have that doctrinal leeway that doesn't necessarily have to happen because Israel is more symbolic, and then ultimately it's like, I don't think Ted Cruz is a Jew, obviously, but from his standpoint, he thinks that prophecy needs to happen for his religion too, for Jesus to come back, right? And then I guess, and then as an interesting side note, something that we're also missing here with the whole Messiah thing is that the Muslim side, they also believe in the return of the Messiah. They believe in Jesus, not that he was the savior of the world who died for sins, but they do believe that he was like, so they say Muhammad, peace be with him, right? They also say that about Jesus. And they do think he's going to come back and bring peace and justice to the world. Hezbollah, not Iran, Hezbollah more specifically, they do believe that if they cause chaos and if they cause anarchy, they're different from a lot of different terrorist groups, right? The Taliban and Al Qaeda, they want to establish their government, right? ISIS, they want Iraq and Syria to be under Sharia law. They have a goal. Hezbollah is unique in the sense is like their goal is, to an extent, it's anarchy. Like they think that by causing chaos, they will trigger the Messiah. So it's not just the whole Pete Hegseth crusade or Donald Trump anointing thing. It's like there's other people doing it too,
And here's one thing I would say. So I have some agreement. I'm disagreeing with the evangelicals on this one, but I have some agreement with those who are against the evangelicals and some disagreement. So I would agree that the Jews of Israel believe in a different Messiah than the Jesus Christ of 2,000 years ago. I would disagree with those saying that's the Antichrist. Because if you actually notice what they're looking at, this actually backs up Latter-day Saint theology and stuff Joseph Smith was saying. Like, what is a Messiah? It's an anointed one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The anointed one. And various prophets were called the anointed ones, not just Jesus or Jehovah when he came down. But they are waiting for a descendant of King David, who is a mortal man, that will gather together the tribes of Israel and build a temple. And the prophecies in the Old Testament of the Davidic servant that John Taylor and Joseph Smith talked about is about that. And a lot of people are expecting that figure to simply be a prophetic figure. But I've even had Latter-day Saint people say that they think Donald Trump is the Davidic servant and he's going to be that King David who goes and builds the third temple. Right? And so we're looking at that. It's like the Jews, are they waiting for the Antichrist or are they waiting for this promised gathering of Israel? And here is something fascinating I'd like to showcase to those who are, if you're not as familiar with some of the content I've done on this channel, when we're talking about these prophecies, I'm going to go to Isaiah chapter 63. I'm just going to pull this up real quick to show something. So here's something I want to ask you. Do you know what the Jews today call us?
Are you gonna say goy?
I'm not asking that word. There's another thing that they sometimes refer us to, not goyim.
I'm trying to think. I don't know. It might come to mind when you say it.
So I'm going to share my screen on
the
this.
Gentiles, the heathen.
The Gentiles, it's very close to the Gentiles, and it is another word for the Gentiles. It is Edom. They specifically will call America Edom, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I'm gonna teach you a little end times Isaiah prophecy. So one code name for the servant in Isaiah is the arm of the Lord. And what Abram Gileadi, he did a great video on the stick of Joseph talking about that, is that the latter-day David, and John Taylor touched on this as well when he's talking about how the latter-day David is not Christ, but is like the guy who goes on his behalf. Abram Gileadi calls him a vassal, where Jehovah, Christ, he's the king. And it's sort of like how they used to give a singlet, like the king would do. It's like, okay, you do this and act on my said. Is somebody going on behalf, fulfilling certain prophecies on behalf of Christ, yada, yada. But in Isaiah 63, there is a figure that shows up that many people assume is Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and it would be easy to assume that until you scroll down and the guy starts talking about Jehovah and calling him the Savior. So this figure who shows up is speaking about Jehovah and saying that he's the Savior in verses 7 and 8. But he's also sort of going on behalf of the Lord, which is why they call him the arm of the Lord in Isaiah. But here is an interesting thing if we're talking about Latter-day Saints and what they call us and how we are going to build up Zion is, let me pull that up, is what we know that there's going to be events with the Jews, and what do the Jews say? They say, who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. And so this is, the servant who's speaking throughout this passage. And that's also how we know it's not Jehovah, because down here he's praising Jehovah as the Savior. But we have the Jews, and a lot of Isaiah, there's the building up of Zion, the New Jerusalem that we know is going to happen on the American continent. And we have the Jews who call America Edom. And we know that the whole world is going to be turned against the Jews at some point, and that when Jehovah returns on the Mount of Olives, he's going to have to save them, right? And they're going to look upon his body whom they pierced and mourn for him. But we have this other event where there's this guy who shows up. And in the previous Isaiah passages, we have this guy building up Zion, building up the New Jerusalem and stuff. And it's like more so a political figure than a prophetic figure, though he's certainly prophetic in nature. And we have the Jews saying, who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? And what Edom and Basra represents is the Gentiles.
Isn't there? I know there's an interpretation that that's Cyrus the Great, because he was the one that let them build the temple.
Exactly. And you
know that they refer to Trump as like the new Cyrus or whatever.
Yeah, and now you're latching on to why there are people who think that Trump may be the Davidic servant. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's what Isaiah is teaching. But you can understand why there are people who think that, because you're absolutely right. Cyrus the Great is a type of this end times figure. Now, we know that in the context of Isaiah, this is before the second coming of the Lord, so this can't be Cyrus the Great, right? But what Isaiah and the book of Revelation does is that they use old-time names, such as 666, which is Nero Caesar, as a type for an end times figure, so that people can understand it's kind of written in code. And so Cyrus the Great is one of the code names for the servant in Isaiah who builds up Zion. And so it's very interesting, like that you point that out. But at some point, we have to ask, what's going on in Jerusalem? How is it affecting us? we have to go over what Isaiah and the Book of Mormon says has to happen among us as a people so that we can fulfill that role. And what I would say is that the Lord is going to arrange for whatever events or changes have to come among America and among us as Ephraim before Isaiah happens. Because, there's a phase in Isaiah where there's the drunkens of Ephraim and they're all drunk on their wine. And then later on, the watchmen see eye to eye and Zion comes again. So we're beginning to see these Isaiah prophecies being set up. Right. And that's what I mean is that the Lord, he's out there, he's playing chess. He's like, okay, we're going to make this happen. We're going to make this happen. And that's going to get people to believe when they see the prophecies coming true. It's very smart if the Lord wants people to believe. And that's very interesting. And Larry W72X says MAGA would crucify the next Jesus. Maybe they will. Maybe when the Davidic servant comes, because the Davidic servant is, based on the Isaiah prophecies, he is almost like a combination of Christ and John the Beloved. I mean, not John the Beloved, John the Baptist. And this super chat says Trump's image is on the Temple Institute's temple coins related to Cyrus. Are you talking about like the LDS Temple Institutes, or are you talking about like the third temple?
I think he's talking about a Jerusalem thing because they put Trump on some coin that commemorated the anniversary of Cyrus the Great, letting them build the temple or something. I could have something like that. I could have,
Larry says Jesus was a liberal of his time, killed by the conservatives of his time. And I can see that from a certain perspective, certainly. But here's something else I would say. Jesus definitely wasn't conservative or liberal. He was probably, I hate to compare myself to him, but he was probably someone like me who thinks both ideologies are stupid. Because here's something I will say. I point this out. A lot of these super conservative, like Christian types, they haven't even received anything supernatural in their life, and they would have been the Pharisees back then. Like, they're judgmental, they push people away from the Lord. Meanwhile, Jesus was having dinner with prostitutes and turning water into wine. And you can imagine the Pharisees. Like, imagine this guy back then. I want you to imagine the context of this. So the Pharisees are like the religious leaders of their time. So think of like the closest thing would be like a bishop or something, someone like who holds a religious position. And then this dude just shows up. He starts teaching all these profound things, and then he's hanging out with prostitutes. He's making everyone wine. He's doing all this crazy stuff. Imagine what the religious authorities are like. Who is this guy? And then he starts performing miracles that they can't perform, right? In fact, the reason why the Pharisees were so upset at Jesus for healing was because they were the ones who held the authority to heal. And so he's healing on the Sabbath, and they make a big fuss about it. So it is interesting. I would say the Pharisees were conservative, but I would also say Jesus wasn't necessarily liberal in the sense that many people would interpret it, or many people would consider liberal being, I would say, pushing sexual degeneracy and stuff, right? I don't think that was Jesus.
Another thing about Jesus is, like, as much as he was defiant of Jewish, like, Hebrew religious law, he was super obedient and subservient to Roman law. Like, he basically told the Pharisees to piss off, and the Romans were like, hey, you got to go. He goes, render to Caesar what is Caesar, There's so many instances where I don't think he broke a single Roman law. And there's,
And that's what I mean, is that I think it's silly to put God himself coming down into the flesh into any of our stupid human political ideologies, because I'm going to be honest, both the conservatives and the liberals were going to Jeffrey Epstein's island and molesting kids, and so neither one of them are good. They're both controlled. And what we have, I would say, in my opinion, take away the controlled opposition and all the crazy stuff, because 10, 20 years ago, I would say more so 20 years ago, because it was about 10 years ago the culture war started, which we now know from the Epstein files is artificially created, that those people created a divide between the conservatives and the liberals that was not there before. At least it wasn't that big, right? They were much closer in the ideologies, where now both sides have basically turned into a cult, I would say, where it's like, you wouldn't even, most people probably wouldn't even be able to date someone with a slightly different political opinion, because all the people around them, it's like they would shun them. It's like it's a cult. Like literally, I think both the super conservative people and the super liberal people are in a cult. I legitimately believe that. And it's a very weird thing. Like, am I a MAGA person? No. I have said for many years, okay, if Donald Trump is actually going to do the things that he says he's going to do, I like him, but I don't trust him. And I don't trust any politician because I think they have ulterior motives, and I think that they're being paid by people. And so, but at the same time, I think the MAGA people and the super liberal, like woke people are just as stupid. Because here's one thing I'm going to say. Donald Trump is not a Nazi or a fascist. Do I like him? No. Do I think he's a good guy? Absolutely not. Do I think he's controlled by evil people? It's very likely. I could be wrong. But based on the Jeffrey Epstein files, I'd say maybe he's not a good person. Maybe he is evil. But by definition, I don't think he's a Nazi or a fascist. And what many of these super liberal people think is they think that Nazism and fascism are the same thing. They aren't. They're two distinct ideologies. And to simplify it, I would say that Nazism is like a combination of fascism, and it has the social policies of fascism with the economic far left policies of socialism, which is why it's called National Socialism, because it has the nationalism of fascism, but it has economic socialist policies. So National Socialism. And so what we have going on both sides is that we have the super MAGA conservatives who they do see a lot of them will see a lot of the things wrong with the world. A lot of them will be very religious. But we see people like Charlie Kirk, who near the end of his life, he's beginning to wake up and like question this stuff. Like, these guys aren't the good guys. And we see that in his text messages that Candace Owens has been releasing, is that Charlie Kirk is going against MAGA, right? And I think anyone who's like, I don't like it when people use the term the MAGA movement, I'm like, oh, it's one of these guys. I don't want to talk to you. At the same time, I don't want to talk to the MAGA people either. I think it's just,
at the end of the day, it's centered on Trump, right? It's like MAGA back in the day was no new wars, and then look at it now, right? It's like,
yeah, like I don't worship Donald Trump as my God, and I don't worship these bizarre social ideologies. And what I would say is that both sides are very self-righteous in different ways, where the MAGA side, it's very much more masculine and aggressive, like, we are going to cleanse this, we're going to make America great, we're going to do this stuff, and it's easy to get them wrapped up in the ideology like that. Where on the other side, it's very much a victim mentality that they loop people in, where it's like, you are oppressed, you are a victim, you have been hurt, all of your problems are the world's fault because of your sexual identity, because of your skin color, because of this. It completely takes away personal responsibility. And I would suggest both of those ideologies are Luciferian in nature. But different sides of the devil, because sometimes the devil is very aggressive with his ideology, but sometimes he's manipulating people. Is like, that's not fair, is it? You deserve all that. Where I think I've learned a lot. I mean, here's another thing we see, because I honestly, like, most of the people watching this podcast, I'm probably more liberal than you. But I'm also not like way into like weird stuff, because I do believe in personal responsibility. And I don't, even if it's true that you are of a race or a gender or whatever that's oppressed, complaining about it's not going to do anything. Whining about it's not going to do anything. And that's sort of the victim mentality. And with what I understand about manifestation and how our thoughts literally bend reality, how quantum physics literally bends reality, if you are in this mindset of the world is against me and everything's unfair and and I'm a victim, you're going to attract that. And even if something is not your fault, I think that you should take responsibility. Like, I always try to do this. I'm like, where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? And both sides in different ways don't do this. For example, to get away from the liberals for a minute, focus on the MAGA, they think that like they don't give any of these people a chance, right? Like, and it's easy to understand why if you were somebody who was gay, you would think that all of the conservatives were judging you. Yes.
You care for the bathroom real quick?
Yes, go ahead. I'll go on screen. So
We're gonna take a
tell
break.
me when you're back.
Okay.
So I'm back on screen. So to go into this on a little bit of a rant more, because I've got it like this, but we see with people who are more conservative, there is certainly a lack of empathy and a lack of understanding for stuff where it's like, if you are just telling everybody that, they are evil or wrong for not listening to you, you're just going to push them away. And what I find is that these hyper conservative people, like this commenter was saying, is very, very judgmental in a way that you actually push people further away from God. I would say I can get along personally more with a lot of very liberal people, even if I might have more in common with a lot of conservative people being more religious, because I just see a lot of the super religious people as Pharisees, and I've been judged by them most of my life. In fact, that's why, even though I've always believed in the supernatural, I've always experienced spiritual things, it wasn't until I was about 21, 22 years old that I started to actually believe in God. And I've noticed this sort of hypocrisy. I'm going to make a video about this, where a lawmaker in Utah wanted to make the word of wisdom law in Utah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like, what is wrong with you? As Jesus said, you have taken the law further than it was intended. And you need to understand that when God tells us to do certain things, it is because he wants what's best for us. And oftentimes, humans misinterpret the things he tells us to do and even add their own things. It's very bizarre stuff. So, and I'm going to offend a lot because I assume this podcast is going to be mostly more conservative people. And yes, it is taking away agency. That's what I mean, where both of these ideologies are Luciferian in nature. And for me, I have tried to be somebody who appeals to people who maybe aren't as religious, because I know that a lot of the noble and great ones, a lot of the most spiritual gifted people are the most spiritual gifted people. I've met people who are not religious in the least bit, who receive more revelation and are closer to God than somebody who you would find going to church. I've found that, and that was me until the Lord told me where I need to be and what I need to do. And Larry, the guy who was talking about this, said Christians created the trans taboo that kids are attracted to. It's like, yeah, when you condemn something so much, it is calling something Luciferian surrenders your agency. Well, I would say just the ideology of taking away people's agency either way. So on the more the left side, we have this forced equity of outcome, where forcing the outcome, where it's everyone has to be equal, and if they're not equal, it's bad. Where I disagree with that. And then on the right side, we have this Luciferian, you must obey, and you are bad if you don't obey that. But either way, it is taking away agency, right? I don't agree with any political ideology. I listen to my Holy Ghost and what he tells me to do. And oftentimes, I'm going to tell you, I can tell the difference. You might notice a difference in when I'm talking at times. When I start spouting off something that's really smart, that's not me. That is just another outside intelligence flowing into me. And I've learned to tap into that, and I'll start speaking more eloquently and using really big words I wouldn't normally use. And then I just snap back to being me and I sound like an idiot, right? That happens, and you'll notice this happen. But Latter-day Avenger is back. He used the restroom. So we are back talking about this. Yeah, and I agree. Jesus would not be happy with the conservatives. And I would say, do you think let's say, for context, let's say, okay, a lot of this left-wing ideology, there's a lot of weird stuff that isn't bad. Do you think Jesus is going to be happy with the people who were so strict with their religious hypocrisy that they pushed people far away into something else? No, Jesus Christ would not want that. If you think that, you don't know him at all. Conservatives would, I agree, conservatives would judge those who follow Jesus. And it's very interesting. When I've taken a political compass test, I've either been like center right or even center left at times, because I see the nuance. And politically speaking, both sides are controlled, where I am just doing my best to follow my father. And that is my belief. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I am trying my best to follow what my father, Jehovah, tells me. So any comments on that?
I can't hear you.
Oh, I muted my mic and then your mic was muted. So yeah. So any comments on what I was saying about conservatives and liberals and both of them on the very far edges leaning into some sort of Luciferian influence with that ideology when they get consumed by their politics and it becomes like a religion for them? I think he can't hear me. Can you guys hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me? I think they can hear me in the chat. You guys can hear me, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm pretty sure the chat could hear me, but you couldn't. Okay, yeah, the chat could hear me. For some reason, you couldn't until I removed myself and added myself. So I was saying, what do you have as this thoughts on this idea that both on the far ends of the political spectrum, both ends are Luciferian in nature? And might I add, in the Epstein files, there is very direct evidence that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were pushing people to the extremes on both ends to create that divide amongst us on purpose. So share your thoughts on this. I'm actually going to use the restroom.
Okay. I think that's, I mean, ultimately, like, you're placing another ideology. I don't know. It's hard to say it. It's like, I would agree with that because, it kind of reminds me of Hugh Nibley, where he compares trusting in the arm of flesh to like political security, right? Whether it be like military security or welfare security. And then it ultimately comes to the point where it's like, that's almost like your new god, right? And then I remember like there's this dude in my ward, like he posted I don't know why this thought came to mind, but he posted Donald Trump's Easter message and not the prophets. And I was like, are you, not that I'm being all pharisaical and like judging people, but I'm like, are a lot of Americans at that point where, you know, oh, Donald Trump's going to speak, but what about President Nelson? Um, yeah, so that's honestly my take on it. Ultimately, like, to an extent, they are ideologies of man, right? I don't think it's a fair argument to say, like, the church is a Republican conservative institution when obviously more recently, like in the 90s, it was a lot, you know, since Ezra Benson, it got a little bit more Republican. He kind of pushed that on people. But before then, you know, it was like Hugh Brown, very liberal. A lot of the apostles from like the early 20th century would almost sound like socialists if you look at their policy. But I think we're kind of like re-emerging from the Ezra Taft Benson age where we're not a Republican church, right? There was even that report that like Uchtdorf, I think his daughter had donated a frick ton of money to Biden under Dieter's name, which caused some controversy. But it just kind of shows it's not all like cut and dry, you know. So I'm not really in control of this live stream, so I can't pull up new questions, but conservatives will call Jesus' followers Luciferian. I definitely do think that it's more of a flaw of conservatism to be like, you're out of line, you're it's almost more judgy versus
Yeah.
like accepting marginalized people. So
And I would agree with that. So here's where it's an interesting thing where I align.
I can't hear
'Cause-
him.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Nope. Hello.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting when you bring that up. So I think part of the psyop politically with dividing people like that, it's also to make us weaker. And so it's interesting because back in like the 90s and stuff, it was like the conservatives were like these uptight or whatever, and all the rock and roll and everything was against the conservatives. But now a lot of like it's gone from a punk attitude where it's like screw the rules to very much a whiny I'm a victim, like I'm sorry, like if you see the Antifa protesters, they're not intimidating. Like it's not like you're thinking like, oh, these are some cool guys. I don't think they're evil, but it's like a very bizarre effect. At the same time, I don't like the conservatives either because my entire life I've been the guy getting in trouble with the people who are stickler from the rules. I stopped going to church when I was like 14 because I thought it was so boring, or maybe I was like 12, 14, and I would only go to church when they forced me to go, but I was always the one getting called out in the hall, yelled at. I was always the one distracting people. I was always the one causing stuff. And I was the same way in school. I was always going to detention. I was always getting suspended from school. I was pulling the firearm. I was never someone who was following the rules. So these uptight conservative people, I don't like them per se, but they've been divided to these extremes to affect us in such. That's what I would say is that it is a psyop on both sides where these super uptight people are not going to get anything done because guess what? They aren't likable for the most part. In fact, the reason why Donald Trump was so likable is because he would say this outlandish stuff. That's why he would say this outlandish stuff like, there's no way a conservative person would ever say that. That's why he was able to get up in Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush's face and just like insult them. And that was funny. That was a strategy that worked. Because you don't see that very often on the conservative side, but we don't see that on the conservative or liberal side anymore either. And so it's interesting because I don't subscribe to any political ideology. Why? Because I think they're all cults. I'm not going to be a part of your stupid cult. Your cult sucks. Right? It's very funny as well. So anytime that on Zion Media we're talking about like crazy end times prophecies, all sorts of stuff, we've had people like, are you going to start your own church or whatever like that? You want to know something funny? There was someone who was saying that allegedly Shane had put drugs in his oil here that he uses for blessings in order to give people baptisms of fire.
Was that your roommate?
It might have been. He might have started that. I don't know. But you want to know what's funny about this oil?
What?
This isn't even olive oil. It's beard oil. And he uses that to bless people, to show people, well, it's your faith that does it. It's your belief in it. It's not the oil. And I will put this on my face. This is the oil that Shane has been using for a long time. Am I going to get a baptism of fire? Am I drugged? No, this is beard oil, and I'm feeling very moisturized. And it smells good. It certainly smells good. But I think more so people's placebo effects, their faith, because I believe the placebo effect is a spiritual thing. I believe faith can give you a baptism of fire, because if we were going to the underlying principles of what Joseph Smith is saying, it's like, yes, there's priesthood authority and stuff, but the underlying principle that all reality acts upon is faith, right? So if you are to receive a baptism of fire, it's because of your faith, right? I smell pretty good now. I'm not receiving any psychedelic episode. I'm not receiving a baptism of fire from the beard oil, for context. Though I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But
I do think it's like a flawed idea. It's like, to think that you have to be Republican conservative to be a faith member. It's like when you look at the original 12 apostles, right? It's like you had a tax collector who was like working for the Romans, and then you had Simon the Zealot who was throwing rocks at them and stabbing them. You know,
yeah,
very opposite, ends of the political spectrum. But
here's what I would say. The problem with conservatism is that they care too much about who is right and wrong and their authority over people.
Yep, I agree.
The problem with liberalism is that they see that there's a problem with it, but they take God and anything spiritual out of the equation, and that they become their own gods, essentially. That they not even their own gods. That's a wrong way of saying it. It's like this sort of idea of being oppressed and victimhood. It's Marxist ideology. It becomes their new god, and so they are led astray in that way because they don't have a god, right? And so to actually be the cool punk who's rebellious, you got to watch any movie. They've got some cool underlying philosophy or spiritual power, and it's not that, well, because I have this skin color or whatever, I'm oppressed. In fact, one of my favorite, I shouldn't even say one of my favorites, guys, I haven't seen it in years, but a show that had a deep impact on me is Naruto. And it deals with a lot of that stuff of oppression and all this stuff. But you want to know what stands out about Naruto? He's never the victim. He's like the whole point of the show is that he's had this terrible life, like that he's been screwed from the beginning, and he rises up. He doesn't let it define him, and that is the biggest thing: is not letting things define you. So when hard things define you, and it becomes your god that you feed energy to, that's it. And so Larry says Fox News told you that liberals can't be Christians. Yeah, well, Fox News probably thinks bombing the Gaza Strip makes you a Christian, right? And that's the point I'm making, is that I don't subscribe to any of these ideologies. I subscribe to my Father, and that my ideology is spiritual before it's religious, right? The Lord has told me that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is an instrument that he is going to use to enact his purposes, and that it has a purpose. But that is because that's what the Lord told me. And I trust the Lord before I trust any man, any institution, any political ideology, any religious ideology. I know the Lord is real. I know his voice, and I trust his voice. And then I trust that, okay, I'm going to be in the position where the Lord wants me to be, right? And so that is a very big thing. And that's also where we see the extremes in Utah, where we have basically the extreme most annoying conservative people and the extreme most annoying liberal people, is because there's this great divide where, like, think of it like this. This is why we see the people with the broken shelves, right? And they just go off the rails into like it's not just like, oh, well, I don't believe it, so I'm going to drink coffee now. It's like, like, I'm not going to mention it, but we see some crazy stuff going on here in Utah. Like the Mormon wife swingers thing, the Secret Lives Mormon wives thing. We see that. And so essentially, what happens when you overwhelm people with unrealistic standards is that out of rebellion and frustration, they go the complete opposite direction. And so we should have nuance. We should be less judgmental, because guess what? Joseph Smith, throughout his life, he was drinking alcohol. He truly was. In Liberty Jail, he was drinking alcohol.
We drink wine. Yeah. Hey, Chad, I got to get going now, but hey, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And so if you'd like, you can plug your Instagram. What is your Instagram name?
Latter-day Avenger.
So go follow Latter-day Avenger on Instagram. He makes great content. It's all hilarious. And we will see you next time. I'll close out this live stream.
Okay.
All right. Well, see you. And so I agree with this. But so let us all go away from these false, man-made traditions and ideologies. All right? Conservatism does not represent the will of Jesus Christ. Liberalism does not represent the will of Jesus Christ. The only way to know what Jesus Christ would have you do is to go directly to the Father. That's the only way. Right? And guess what? I've lost friends on both sides and that's one of the reasons I think that those ideologies are so stupid. Because again, it is people who are, I'm going to say, on the far rights and the far left, they're both brainwashed. You can't have a conversation with these people if you disagree with them. You can't, and they view anybody who disagrees with them as the enemy. Where my ideology is, I know what I want to happen. I know what the Father wants to happen. I will align with the will of the Father, and I will make allies. I will make friends with anybody who is willing to make that happen. Right? Even if I disagree with them on some areas, even if I disagree with them on some of my theology, because I have my own personal beliefs. Joseph Smith famously said that those who are too, this is paraphrasing, I can find the exact quote, but he said essentially that those who are too uptight with their religious beliefs are too much like the Methodists, that he would that all men have the right to their own opinions. And he certainly had differences of opinions for what he seemed to teach versus Brigham Young, versus Orson Pratt, versus people that were in his close circle. And he was a prophet. He saw Jesus Christ himself come to him. And yet he allowed people to have their own opinions to an extent. Right? So we need to find that balance. And when we are too strict with stuff like that, we are no different than the Pharisees. And what happens is we push people away from God unto new gods. So who knows, right? But that's what I would say on that. So if anybody has any additional comments they'd like me to address or any super chats before we end this, I will give you the opportunity. Now, I will try and read through some of these because I had to use the restroom. He will come with spiritual power to establish the physical government and establish law by the order of the eternal kingdom order. It is written, the law shall come forth from Zion and the word from Jerusalem. Yes. To take the name liberal, conservative, Democrat is to overshadow our being called by the name of Christ. We do not understand him from the lens of other ideology. That's right. We are meant to take upon ourselves the name of Jesus Christ. We are not meant. Here's something I would disagree with. People say, Mormons aren't Christians. They believe in a different Jesus Christ. And then all the Mormon apologists, they rush to say, no, we're just like you. We're just like you. Please accept us. Please accept us. We're just like you. Yeah, they're right. We're not like them. I don't believe that I am a Christian. I believe that I am to become a Christ and that I am to take upon myself his name. And you still do mental gymnastics to say Trump is the best option. I don't think Trump is the best option, but I don't think we have any good options. I just don't. It's like whatever we go with, we have a load of crap. Right? Like, I'm going to be honest, I think Kamala Harris was a bad guy too. He was. So where do we PM you, LDC? You can find me on Instagram at LatterDayChad. Exactly how it sounds like it's spelled. When we choose a side, we are still trying to force our will on others and restrict their agency. Interesting. And so, just reading through some of these prophets, some forget to look to the Lord, the servant on his right and is on the left, and they confuse the servant for his opposing hand. That's very interesting. Division is based in religion almost exclusively. Here's what I would say. The Lord wants people to follow them. He wants people to follow him. But the Jesus Christ I know, he doesn't want people building statues of him. He doesn't want people to treat him in much the way that people want him. He wants love and he wants respect, right? But if you look at the Israelites, what did they want? They wanted a golden calf to worship. They didn't want to go up to the mountain and know the person of Jehovah and see him face to face. So when he comes and says, you never knew me, maybe that's literal because he's an actual person who has thoughts and emotions and feelings, and he would rather be treated like an actual person. And so perhaps the Lord sometimes he's like, okay, they want religion, that's what I'll do. That's the way we'll establish my kingdom, if that's what they want. Who knows? I think the Lord will do whatever means it takes to get people to wake up, right? I think that the Lord will do whatever it takes to get Zion to wake up. And again, next video we are doing on the woman of Zion. So before we go, a few things. One, the YouTube algorithm's been lacking a bit lately. Not just for us. David Douglas did a video. Are they restricting Zion media? I don't think they are. I think it's just the new algorithm. There's something called hype points. So after you like the video, there should be an option to come up to hype the video, but you can only use that 3 times a week. You can use all 3 on the same video, or you can use it on 3 different videos. But that, especially when the video first comes out, spreads the video around more, right? I've experimented with this, and I've seen that the videos that we specifically tell people to hype do better. So if you want more of me on the channel, you want more of this stuff, again, I was asked to come back because the people who are behind Zion Media, not Shane and David Douglas, the actual people behind it, people were requesting to have me back on. They wanted me to do certain stuff on here, and so here I am. But Christians believe that Jesus is God. Mormons don't. Actually, the Book of Mormon says that Jesus is the very eternal God manifesting in the flesh. And here's what I would say. Mormons don't understand their own ideology, and neither do Trinitarians. And they think that they're a lot more different than they are, and they're not. In fact, I would say the biggest problem with Trinitarianism, you want to know what it is? It's the fact that they killed so many people for not believing it. And I think it got some stuff right. But literally, we have people being forced who did not believe in certain creeds. And I think it was like Pope Gregory or something who basically said, because they were asking, well, how do we know which of them are us and which of them are them? And I think it was Pope Gregory who said something along the lines of, the Lord knows whose is his, kill them all. That's evil. All right? The fact that they were killing people over these creeds is evil, but at the same time, the Mormons nowadays are a lot of times doing the same things that the creeds were doing. They're just doing their best to guess. They're voting on it. It's like, well, we have the authority, so we'll just trust that whatever we say it is. That's one thing that I notice is that, in order for doctrinal things, we should go to Jehovah directly and ask him and wait for him to respond in his own voice. But it's just very interesting stuff with the nuance that we need to have an open mind and an open heart to find common ground, but not in a begging way. It's like, oh, please accept us, please. It's so stupid. But yeah. So hype the videos. After you like the video, hype it. Leave comments. So I want to hear, actually, what do you think of what I said about these political things, about Israel, about Iran? Do you think that Netanyahu is alive? Do you think he's not alive? Why do you think he's using AI? Do you think Donald Trump was actually anointed by Jesus Christ? Do you think that they're just doing that to manipulate people? Do you think this is Armageddon? How do you think the LDS Church and us as Ephraim will play a role in the last days? Do you think that when the man comes from Edom and Basra or amongst the Gentiles, what do you think that will mean? So leave it below in the comments, and make sure you guys tune into the video with Stanley Heaton on the wife of the Davidic servant and how it's prophesied in Isaiah. Because if you are claiming to be the end-time servant in Isaiah, this seems to be a description of the servant's wife. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, we will see you.